faculties, guests, collaborators, and all the participants. Welcome to the 5th episode of Public Dialogue Series organized by Kathmandu University School of Management, MPPM Scholars Network. My name is Ram Charmakar, and I am a MPPM Scholar at Kathmandu University School of Management. Here I also represent the South Asia Regional BRIC Consortium as a regional coordinator in this public dialogue series. Today's session, Avinash ji and myself will moderate today's session. So I'd like to request Avinash ji to introduce himself. Avinash ji, over to you, and then I'll continue.
Thank you, Ramji. So I'm Avinash Jha. I'm also an MPPM scholar at Kathmandu University School of Management.
Thank you. KUSUM has established its brand as pioneer of public policy program in Nepal. It has been running the Masters of Public Policy program, Public Policy and Management program since August 2019. The program aims to deal with wide range of public policy and governance issues, along with enhancing management knowledge and skills for public sector for effective service delivery. The MPPM Scholars Network is a student-led public policy discussion platform within KUSUM that has been organizing regular public policy discourses through its initiative called Tomorrow's Policy Leader for Public Dialogue. The dialogue series aims to bring together public policy leaders and experts around the world and focus on emerging issues that are important for Nepal's prosperity. This event is being organized in collaboration with South Asia Regional BRIC Consortium, Fulbright Alumni Association of Nepal, I'm Swedish Development Partner, and Nepal Policy Research Network. So we'd like to thank all the collaborators for supporting us to organize this public dialogue series. The theme for today's discussion is the informal sectors amidst COVID-19, the alarming concerns for livelihood and employment in Nepal. To talk about this theme, we have three respected speakers today. So I'd like to introduce them briefly. So we have Mr. Suresh Pandit. Mr. Suresh Pandit is a Nepal Country Director at Global Fairness Initiative. He has 2 decades of working experience in government and international agencies. He served at UNICEF Nepal from 2015 to 18 as the head of sub-national office and managed 2015 earthquake multi-sector response and recovery programs. He also worked with the UN Resident Coordinator's Office from 2010 to 15 and assisted with development and humanitarian coordination. He has also aided in the development and implementation of United Nations Development Assistance Framework and enhanced government and UN capacity for disaster preparedness and response. So prior to joining the UN, he was monitoring, evaluation, and advocacy manager at the Norwegian Refugee Council from 2007 to 9. And he also served at Social Welfare Council of Nepal from 2000 to 2007 as an assistant director. He has also consulting experiences with USAID, IFRC, government ministries, and other INGOs. Mr. Pandit is from Tanoh district, Gandaki province of Nepal, and holds master's degrees in business administration and human rights. So welcome you, Suresh sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ramji.
Thank you so much. And we have next speaker, Jasmine Raj Bhandari. Jasmine Raj Bhandari is a senior social protection specialist at the World Bank in Nepal. She leads on World Bank projects which help the Nepal government provide more efficient social protection services such as social security allowances and in helping the government address youth employment agenda in Nepal. She has also worked on similar projects in Bhutan and India. Prior to that, she has worked for human rights NGOs, Save the Children, and DFID. Her career has been focused on working with vulnerable communities, children, women, and helping in developing processes and services for their inclusion in development and improving their life outcomes. She has a bachelor's degree in economics and sociology from Binghamton University, Newark, and a master's in international development from American University in Washington, DC. So welcome you, Jasmine ma'am, in this session.
Thank you. Namaste Sabajanlai.
So we have next speaker, Mr. Narayan Prasad Bhattarai. Narayan Prasad Bhattarai is a national project coordinator at ILO country office in Nepal and has been serving there since 2007. He has more than 2 decades of working experience in non-governmental and international organizations with diverse portfolio and has managed the multiple projects relating to child labor, forced labor, labor rights, and social justice. Prior to joining the UN, he was a program manager at Nepal Rugmark Foundation from 2004 to 7. He was also translator, presenter at World Service, BBC World Service, Nepali section UK from 2001 to 2. Teacher of statistics in Padma Kanya multiple campus from 1997 to 2001, and a program consultant at Asian American Free Labor Institutes from 1995 to 96. He has also conducted and published holds MSc in Social Policy and Planning in Developing Countries, Political Science from UK, and MSc in Statistics from Durham University. So welcome to you, Narayan sir, in this session.
Thank you. Namaste.
So for genuinely accepting our request to share your thoughts and opinions on the mentioned topics. So before we hear from our respected speakers, I'd like to request our MPPM Program Director, Associate Professor Dr. Purna Nepali to share his valuable remarks. Purna sir, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ramji, for introducing the tomorrow's policy leader for policy dialogue series and our program. Distinguished speakers, they have been very well engaged in this social protections, livelihood, and different sort of the issues. And as Ramji has mentioned, and we are running our academic program, Master of Public Policy and Management. It deals with the today we are trying to discuss about the social issues and social policy and social justice issues and social policy and social justice issues like an issue. If you look at the current scenario, because we are well engaged in the prosperity issues, we are very much well engaged in the economic prosperity issues, and nowadays most of the activists and different practitioners are raising that our issues and issue of social policies and social justice are being undermined. And that's why we're trying to focus more on social policies and social justice issues. And if you look at our specializations just like social policy and justice, development policy, and federalized and local governance, and hydropower and energy and transport. And under this specialization, social policy and social justice, and also we're trying to establish our transdisciplinary social justice lab, where we can get a lot of opportunities to interact with a diverse range of the scholars and practitioners who are really working outside the academia. And also we're trying to bring the different talents and intellectual kind of the contribution they are doing outside the academia. And Kathmandu University believe on the principle of university and community partnership. And not only having that kind of the very mutual contributions or mutual relationship between university and community, and also we're trying to serve our policy institutions, just like national planning commissions, provincial planning commissions, and also the local planning commission and city planning commission. And how can we serve to these different kind of the policy institutions and public institutions? And based on focusing on all these varieties, and where organizing these sort of programs so that we'll bring a different kind of the issues from the different parts of the world and different spheres of the society, and focusing on all these kind of things. And we're trying to be engaged in a very pragmatic way so that every issues will be unfolded and will be brought together so that we'll be able to contribute our whole social transformation and whole socioeconomic transformation process, and focusing on that. And we are organizing this sort of program, and also our students are getting exposures to interact with the different distinguished personalities working in the World Bank, ILOs, and different UN agencies and different organizations. And actually it will really bring a different kind of issues so that we'll bring this kind of issues at the surface, and it will be very good basis and valid basis for informed policy making process and whole transformation process. And it will also raise the different kind of issues on the social justice, and focusing on that. And we are organizing this sort of program. And I would like to welcome very distinguished personalities and speakers here, and also the different participants. I'm noticing we have a very distinguished participants here. Even they can raise a lot of issues, and I am a social justice issues, and that's why. And we'll bring a different kind of issues we'll discuss in a very vibrant way. And at the end, I would like to welcome all the distinguished speakers and as well as the different participants. Thank you so much, Ramji, for organizing this very wonderful event. Back to you. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable remarks. Now we are going to start our formal session. There will be 3 presentations from each speakers. There will be 20 minutes presentations from each speakers. After all the presentations, we'll have questions and answers session. The participants can use hand raise option. So once we announce your name, you can unmute yourself and ask your questions directly to the speakers after the presentation. So I'm pleased to inform you that we have also live through KUSUM MPPM Scholars Network Facebook page. For those who cannot join this online session. In this session, we'll use both English and Nepali as a mixed language. So without further delay, I would like to request our first speaker, Mr. Suresh Pandit, to start his presentation. Suresh sir, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Ramji. I also like to thank you, Kathmandu University, for organizing such a wonderful program. So let me start my presentation. Okay, Ramji, does it say?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So, as we are already introduced, I'm Suresh Pandit once again. So, as per the program planning, we have been asked to make 20 minutes presentation. That's why I tried to confine, keeping the time constraint. So, I'm just moving further. Basically, my presentation will be more focused on what is the background of the informal sector, and how the COVID-19 is impacting this informal sector, and what we can do or what we have to do. So in these major 3-4 folders, I will be confining my presentation. So let me begin with what we understand with the informal sector, because it has been a widely debated issue that informal sector is contributing this and informal sector is like this, but it is largely ignored. So if we see by its core nature, any business, any entrepreneurship, which is usually very small or tiny in size, which is usually not organized, and the most important part is which is always out of the government regulation framework. So we can see many areas, either be street vendors or any factories which are not formally registered, or any brick kiln sectors, or carpet industries. There are many such areas which are not in formal framework. Those areas we consider as informal sector. Definitely we can have a long list there. I'm not going with that, keeping a long list. And another important thing is we have to understand informal sector versus informal work in the formal sector. Because while we're talking about any informal sector which is not regulated by the government, any regulation framework, it is not always informal sector, because every works which comes under informal sector is definitely informal. But again, what we can see is there are many formal sector, like even government offices, even corporate sector, banking sectors, or even development sector. Even within the formal sector, we can see informal works. This difference is very important. So what is the relation between this informal sector and the government? That is also another issue. I would say this is like a catch-22, because neither the whole informal sector wants to go to the government or wants to reach out to the government, nor the government wants to take them in. So the whole gambit of this, let's say, conflict is like standing in the gravity. So there are many reasons why government doesn't want to reach out to informal sector. Like there may be other reasons why informal sector, they don't want to go into the government's formal regulation framework, because there may be tax issues. So this is the relationship always making this informal sector complicated and, sorry, just a second. Just a second. I don't get here.
Sir, presentation mode ma राख्नु भयो नि सही हुन्छ.
Say
Next,
the-
next.
I don't
तल जानु त.
यो सबै उसले check दियो कि. Okay. What is this presentation mode? Just a second.
तल छ नि त्यो प्लस माइनस पर्सेन्टेज लिएर.
Right. Okay, sorry. Yes. Okay, thanks. Sorry. Okay, sorry. So this relationship is making the informal sector most complicated and largely ignored as well. So if we see how big this informal sector and what is its contribution in the national economy. Though we have got colleagues from World Bank here, I may not be a prepared person to explain all these things, but very, I mean, whatever we can see from bare eyes, that I'm just sharing here. Just according to ILO, it says we have 94.3% of employment in Nepal falls in informal employment. Comparing to global is 61.2. So this figure shows that informal employment is universal phenomenon that applies to everywhere. It has got a very significant percentage though, but in this South Asian context, we are very high. 94.3 is itself a very high figure, and Bangladesh follows, I think, with 89.2. So we are in top ranking. So since the informal economy, or since this much bigger informal employment is within the informal economy, then how this sector is contributing to the whole economy? That is a big question. Perhaps during the post-COVID impact analysis, it has to be deconstructed quite a bit. That we'll discuss further. And as we all know, agriculture is the major dominant sector for the informal employment in Nepal. Usually, its value is largely overlooked, as I already mentioned. What are the major issues that we can see in the informal sector is another area we have to think, because I'm just trying to raise the issues. The most vibrant thing is we can see alarming child labor. In our context, 1.6 million children between 5 to 17 years. Many children definitely fall under this informal sector, informal employment. And we can see out of that, more than 600,000 are at very hazardous work, and the data shows 60% are girls. So this is really a pathetic situation. This data is actually from pre-COVID context, and we can imagine in the post-COVID context, what will be the impact? Obviously, we can say this data will drastically increased, no matter how much efforts and policy we are putting at the moment. That is not sufficient. And there are many other issues. I'm just putting all those issues in a same basket here. Since in the informal employment, there is no contract issue, there is no job security, then there is high chances of exploitation, and human right is not considered. There are many women issues, gender-based violences, and they have to work in a very harsh working condition, no decent work, and obviously their living conditions, livelihood, and they are having severe health problems. And we know we have got another health problem, uterus prolapse to many women. So many such problems we can find out in those hazardous work areas. And obviously social protection. There is no social protection because this social protection tries to incorporate or tries to support at least to the formal sector. That's why we may have a very long list of issues that we can see in the informal sector. I just had a look one assessment report from World Bank that was issued in the very beginning of this lockdown. It says that 0.75 billion economic loss was per month. For a layman or for individual Nepali people, or even for a policymaker, we have to understand and we have to raise this concern. What does that mean for for those informal sectors. Does that hit the big corporate houses? Does that hit government treasury? Or that hits to street vendor and very vulnerable subgroups within the informal sector? Because we can see there are many strata even within the informal sector. If you see from the vulnerability ranking, there may be strata. That's why these losses, yes, definitely there are World Bank, there are ADBs, and there are many UNDPs. There are many prominent agencies, they will be working on that. I'm not challenging this. But if we miss to deconstruct how it is impacting to each and every vulnerable groups, even within this informal sector, then this sector may be getting injustice. Because we calculate in an average, and the real severity will always be ignored. This is the analysis part. But in general, we all know there is huge economic crisis which is being even increased. So along with the growing COVID cases and prolonged lockdown, definitely economic crisis is also increasing, and vulnerability will be increasing, and there will be more vulnerable groups. They will get more affected. And if you see the context, those vulnerable groups will be more affected, and they will be more trapped in the vicious poverty cycle. If you see a very simple example from brick kiln industry, workers in this current season, they could not work due to certain of their working season because of the COVID lockdown. Then they have to go their home back almost empty-handed. On top of that, they were all in the debt. It means their next season's earning is also impacted by this lockdown, by this COVID impact. That's why they will be really, I mean, that is just a representation case. They will be in a vicious poverty cycle. And we can see job loss, jobless, and many enterprises, self-employment people, they all get collapsed, and they even don't have running capital to revive their business. So this is not only a job we're talking about in the formal sector. So in the informal sector, self-enterprise, what we call is self-entrepreneurship. Self-entrepreneurship. That is a big job because he or she is taking care of family, and in most cases, that is family-run business. So this kind of massive job loss is also increasing. And another important concern that we have to understand here is it may trigger social crimes, suicidal case. Just in the morning, I read a suicidal case that happened in Sindhu Palchok. Pathetic, really. This is, we can't even think about that. So, I mean, these cases, suicidal cases, are increasing. And as I already mentioned, child labor issues and social tensions. So all these will be gradually booming, gradually increasing. So I just want to highlight here Arab Spring, that we probably know. If you see the Google also, we can find out the whole Arab Spring, Arab tension, that was actually fueled or triggered by one incident that took place in Tunisia. That was in Tunisia, a Tunisian street vendor, he committed suicide. Then that helped to trigger the Arab Spring. So if we undermine the severity of this crisis, then we cannot deny such tensions may escalate in our context also. And another, although this is quite big, but we can see how it is going to impact Human Development Index. Although it's the business of UNDP, they will be calculating, but we can see from BRIs and SDG, it is going to hit many many goals. So poverty, that is directly hit, hunger, health, education, was decent work, economic empowerment. So if we ignore the post-COVID context and potential implication, then we can't. I mean, for the overall informal sector, we can't think that we'll be achieving SDG because there are many goals that is not possible if we ignore this issue. So after this much discussion, I'm just willing to raise a few concerns to all speakers here and all academicians and all students and professionals. After considering this,
Hello. Hello.
Hello, I cannot hear. Sureshji, what happened? Is it only?
डिस्कनेक्ट हुनुभयो कि जस्तो लाग्यो मलाई
त्यही जस्तो छ एकचोटि
उहाँलाई एकचोटि गरौँ त्यसपछि भएन भने नेक्स्ट स्पिकर
कनेक्ट गर्दै हुन्छ अलिकति इन्टरनेट स्लो भयो जस्तो कनेक्ट गर्दै
ठिक छ
can you hear me, Ramji?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, it was technical error. So my request is we have to make this is a social development agenda at the moment because as we know these agendas shapes by the context. So this particular time is the new context and post COVID-19 and its impact to the overall informal sector that has given us opportunity to accelerate the entire informal sector. So if we can make this as an agenda, that makes sense. And another concern is we have been doing many assessments, but it has to be undertaken in a very categorical in a categorical way because if we put everything in the same basket, it will be injustice. So how we can analyze in the in the whole post-COVID-19 impact, what is the proportion of informal sector, or how the overall informal sector is getting affected, and even within the whole informal sector, what is the status of vulnerable subsectors? Because equity perspective is also very important for us to develop policies or to develop any programs so that we can address these issues. If we don't do that way, or if we forget the equity perspective, then our planning and our programs may not reach out to the vulnerable subgroups within the informal sector. That is also another concern I just want to raise. Another issue, just before this session, we had just informally discussed also, Ramji was raising that issue. As per the government record, 22 billion rupees is mobilized from NGO sector. So if we see some of big INGOs, they are mobilizing their annual budget, which is bigger than quite handsome government 3 ministries budget. See how much resources we are bringing in. Once I had a discussion with finance ministry senior officials in this regard. He was telling proudly that 22 billion is being spent, mobilized from this sector. Then I asked questions. So have you ever realized how much difficulties these agencies are facing to generate this much fund? And have you ever thought about diverting or facilitating this much amount for national priority? Because national priority is always changed by the context. It is always nothing like written in the periodic plan. Sometimes that has to be flexible because of pandemic and some like epidemic or any disasters. And if the situation comes adverse or different, then there may be some instant policy measures coming out. So the answer was not satisfied. That's why how government can encourage the whole NGO sector to at least mobilize and facilitate at least certain percentage of their fund in this sector, that and in a very cluster way, because we all know many resources are quite fragmented, and such fragmented resources and their activities sometimes do not bring the desired results. So if government can take some decision and if they can provide us some guidance, then maybe we can mobilize a significant amount with concrete programs and concrete plans to some of the vulnerable groups. Like I'm just taking here bricks because I know brick kiln sector because I'm closely working with brick kilns. So these are the issues I just want to raise here. So some of the recommendations I'm just coming here with, though it is not the very specific, but just indicative. I'm trying to make it very indicative. If we can come up with some short-term and long-term policy measures, that would be a good and would be able to aid this sector. For example, because now we're talking about post-COVID, but still COVID is also ongoing. That's why we can say sometimes during and post we can use synonymously here in this context. So how much relief we have been providing to some of the vulnerable subgroups, that is very clear. That was not sufficient, and most vulnerable groups, they never reach out to those support. So still, if you can develop some certain plan to provide economic and livelihood aid for specific identified vulnerable groups, that would be very important. And similarly, development partners also need to prioritize this sector. I'm sure it will be coming, because this is not only the case in Nepal, it is the global issue. And obviously, from their respective headquarters, it has been the serious concern. But since the informal sector does not have voice and access, particular consideration for informal sector, again, may be overlooked. That's why it has to be a concern of development partners also. And from the government side, I also had a meeting with Ministry of Women and Social Welfare, and I was giving the same suggestion. Actually, a huge amount is being facilitated by Social Welfare Council or through many INGOs. Then why don't we develop a white paper or some roadmap indicating that we are going to support informal sector and their economic relief or livelihood and employment, all this. So that can be very instrumental to provide guidance and facilitation to INGOs and even NGOs. That is also not happening. We all are lost. And another recommendation I'm just putting here is, since it is a huge issue, this is, as I already mentioned, this is, and we all know this is not only the case of Nepal, it is a global problem, global issue. That's why neither single government or even a big donor or a big UN agency, they alone cannot solve this problem. That's why we have to have a multi-agency initiative here, and we have to discuss and we have to develop a specific package to revive the whole job creation and livelihood. Because for this, it has to be intensively worked out. And I'm just referring here, YETI project. I just spoke to World Bank colleague also. Yes, YETI is there. Youth Employment Transformation Initiative. This is one of the dedicated program. Government is proudly announcing that they have come up after COVID, and they assertively claiming that it will be supporting to post-COVID context also. But for me, YETI is not the project designed for the post-COVID context. It was since from the very beginning. So it has got its own character. So there is no transformation. Just giving 100 days job for doing something, either be infrastructure or reviving infrastructure or social service or whatever it is aiming to pay certain amount. But we need some specific program that actually transforms, and the employment, that labor, that wages they get, that has to be institutionalized. So just giving 2 months, 3 months work, yes, that is very ad hoc. But how we can make that ad hoc in a more transformational way, and how we can make those efforts institutionalized, that is very important. So we probably can revisit some of our existing programs that gives us indication to develop even better. So again, another recommendation I'm just putting here is ILO has already recommended in 2015, which was, yes, it was thinly moving ahead. I don't blame, it was nothing done. But the point here I'm trying to raise is how we can take the opportunity of this COVID. Because if we are proactive, then we can bring the whole, not whole, significantly larger informal sector in the formal sector. And we can rescue them also. And government also gets benefited, and the most informal sector also gets benefited. So what is the point? Or we can find out the connector. What brings informal sector and the government together? So we can figure out what are the opportunities of this context. So ultimately we can aid the informal sector. So we have to have further discussion, further analysis to come up with solid ideas. So these are my just your brain opening, and I'm just trying to make you think about that. So I end my presentation here. So any questions, I will be happy to respond. And if you don't have time to ask, or if you even think later any question in your mind, you can always write me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for a wonderful and comprehensive presentation. Definitely we'll have questions, but we'll take at the end of all presentations. So we'll have a separate session for the question and answer. So thank you so much again. Now I would like to request Jasmine Raj Bhandari to start our presentation. Madam, over to you.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. Let me just put this on. Is it on the full PowerPoint or not yet?
I think it's coming.
Not yet.
Okay.
Slide mode ma jana payo ni.
हजुर अब भयो होला हैन?
अब भयो.
Okay.
Okay.
Now
Okay, thank you. First to Kusum, I think the type of program that you're running is a wonderful opportunity for many people, not only for us to engage with others, but for others to also engage. So first I'd like to thank Kusum and the collaborators for inviting me to this platform. I have a feeling, and listening to Suresh's presentation, that we will be touching on some similar aspects as we have all present, and I think the same is going to be true for Naranji as well. So I'm here today to focus on the social protection aspects, but as you'll see during my presentation, there will be a bit of an overlap in terms of the conversation that we're having across the three panelists. So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about first the concept of social protection, the context of social protection in Nepal, informal workers, and then move on to the thing that we are all living with right now, and really focus a little bit on COVID. So first, a step back and a little bit sort of conceptual. When we look at what social protection is, in terms of, and obviously as I'm here as a representative of the World Bank, you must recognize that as I speak, I'm talking about sort of the definitions of the World Bank. There are some differences in the way different agencies define social protection, but I think there are very many similarities. So when we talk about social protection, we are talking about public interventions, one. And these are interventions that are there to assist individuals, households, and communities to really manage their risks better and provide support when they are critically poor. So we think about social protection systems. We talk about social protection systems as that which helps the individuals, the families, but especially amongst those, the poor and the vulnerable, and cope with crises and shocks. Now, these crises and shocks can be anything from a health crisis when your bread earner, the main person who's earning an income in your family, passes away, to COVID, to the type of landslides we are having now, the earthquake, all of those. It could be any of those. It is also a system that helps people find jobs, helps these individuals and families invest in the health and education of their children, as well as protect the aging population. So social protection is very vast. And as you will see, and I know this slide is a bit messy, but I think that is the idea, to try and portray that social protection is in fact a myriad of programs and services. It's not one single program. It's, you know, anything from emergency assistance to public works, to disability services, to cash transfers, to unemployment benefits, to services for youth. So there's a lot comes under social protection. And when we talk about social protection in Nepal, we first take a step back and think about what we're trying to address, and that is poverty and vulnerability. I know I don't need to read this whole slide because all of us are very familiar with the rates of poverty and the fact that poverty is decreasing in Nepal, but it is still there and is still something that at least a quarter of our population is challenged with. We have social exclusion, we have economic shocks. We all know we are vulnerable to climate change in this context. And one of the things that we find challenging is that the children that are here today are not able to reach their full potential because of the way our system is, because of the way our programs are. So you can imagine, based on a human capital index done by the World Bank, a child born in Nepal today can only realize 49%, not even 50% yet, of her productive potential. And we know that one of the key ways for people to move out of this type of situation is a job. But unfortunately, and as Sureshji was also saying, most of the jobs that are there in Nepal are not providing that way out of poverty. A lot of times the jobs that are in Nepal have inequalities, the unemployment is low, they're not productive. But we do have the context in Nepal that there are some major policies that the government has approved quite recently that are trying, I say, because as you know, policies to implementation is a long gap. But there are several policies in place in Nepal right now. So for example, the Social Security Act, the Social Protection Act, the Right to Employment Act, the Prime Minister's Employment Program, and there is also an upcoming National Social Protection Framework. But all of that are policies that are going to, over time, make a difference. What we have right now in the context of Nepal is really social protection programs. And I'm not going to go through every program that's on the slide, but I wanted to give you the context that social protection is not new to Nepal. The government has been having interventions in Nepal around social protection for a long time, not necessarily calling it social protection. As far as back as the 1800s, Kokana Leprosy Home, Pasupati Old Age Home, these are just some examples of older social protection schemes that the government has been running. Now we have midday meals, we have scholarship programs, we have food for education, there's a health insurance pilot, youth self-employment fund, there's a social security fund, there's cash relief, there's social security assistance, there's a social security fund, there's a Prime Minister's Employment Program. So there's a lot of programs there around social protection. But our focus today is also on informality. And actually this slide is very much, I would say, in fact, a repeat of what Sureshji was saying, because I think all of us are using the very similar, if not the same definitions around informality. And so we look at informality in two aspects. One is those who are informal sector workers. These, as Sureshji was also saying, are workers who are not covered by Social Security. They're often self-employed, they're unregistered, or they're employed in an unregistered business. Then you have informal employment. And there's a lot here of sort of self-employment. Those who are contributing as family businesses. They work in informal, they're employees of informal enterprises. They're often holding informal jobs in formal firms. So they're not subject to a lot of the national legislation, income tax, social protection benefits. So these are the two categories that actually cover it all. And I was smiling to myself because obviously the data globally is also quite limited in terms of informality, because the numbers and the data Suresh is also used are the same ones that I'm using. So again, despite informality not being talked about a lot, it is the majority of the working people, right? More than 60% globally of the workforce are informally employed. And as Suresh said, South Asia has the highest proportions of this. But what we have to also remember, just like social protection, informality is not one thing. There's so many examples of the types of jobs and economic activities that are in informality. And for many people, it is not a choice. It's because you don't have other choices to really make your livelihoods work. Now, the informal economy tends to, doesn't mean all, but tends to employ lower skilled workers, less productive workers. And then what happens as a result is that when you compare, they're actually earning less. The other issue and the challenge and the difficulty for informal sectors is they face multiple problems. They're often, as a result of earning less, poorer. They're often more vulnerable because they don't have any of those support mechanisms. What that also means is they're often less likely to qualify, even if the government has a program that is supposed to support them. It often means that they're not able to access it. And in times like COVID, you can guess that these are the majority of the people. Just a quick example on the next slide of the informal employment in Nepal. And this is based on work some of our colleagues did, but it's really labor force 2018 data. I mean, reality, over 90% of the people who are working in Nepal are in the informal sector. There are very few who are not. And some of those are unemployed, some of them are in public wage, some of them are in the private sector, but a majority of Nepalese in the labor force are very much in the informal sector. And when we think about social protection and the informal sector now, so not just about the informal sector, when we put together social protection and the informal sector, we often call them the missing middle, because many social protection programs focus on the very poor, the ones who are extremely, extremely vulnerable. That's the type of household. And then for those who are in public sector employment or very formal sector, there's things like we have in Nepal, Social Security Fund, or the Citizen CIT. So there are support and social protection for both ends, but there are many people who are in this middle, who are not really eligible for either end of the programs. And they're also actually very difficult and missing in the government systems. And as a result of being missing in other government systems, are often very difficult for the government to then go and find as well, which means even having access to programs, whether it be work or otherwise, whether it be as a response to COVID, it means a lot of times informal workers are missing in government responses as well, which could include COVID-19. Before going to sort of COVID-19, formal sector and work, when we look at sort of global impact on work, what we do know is that close to half of the global labor force will have or may lose their livelihoods because there's a decline in working hours. And this is something from the UN. We also know, and we know Nepal is being affected by this as well, is that international remittances inflow is also declining or likely to decline. And the loss of the jobs and the income across the world can also lead to poverty. And we're talking about poverty that's not just economic. We're talking about poverty that means you are no longer eating as much as you should. You're no longer feeding your child as much as you should. You may not be able to invest in your child in terms of their health, in terms of their education, in terms of their own skills. So when we're thinking about the impact of COVID and work, it has a huge impact beyond just income. In Nepal, what we, there is, I would say, quite limited documentation to date at the national level of COVID impact. But what we do know is that several groups are going to be most affected. Those who are already long-term unemployed and subsistence workers. Those are informal daily wage workers, especially rural to urban migrants. And when they lose their livelihoods, they have very little access then to family or community-based social safety nets because they've moved, they've left what they had at home. And so then they have nobody to fall back on. But these are not the only groups of workers who are affected or likely to be affected. Formal workers or informal workers, oftentimes because the business itself is not surviving, are often laid off or furloughed. And then obviously there's the huge group of labor migrants, including, we know, the seasonal migrants to India Either they're no longer going to be able to access some of those job opportunities, some of them are forced to return, or some of them are just going to face a reduction in earnings. And an ILO figure, which is likely to be larger than this, is that 1.6 to 2 million jobs are likely to be disrupted. Now, that could be a minimum. And again, we think about, what else could happen in terms of impact when you're losing your work. And if you're working overseas, that also means you're losing your income. And for a country like Nepal, it also means a decline in remittances. Now, that's the situation. But what can be done? And what can be done for informal workers as well, especially those who are affected by COVID? So in terms of social protection and a response to the COVID-19 pandemic globally, this is one of the ways that we think about things, that there's three broad groups of populations. There are those who are already receiving some social assistance. So in Nepal, we have the social security allowances, for example, senior citizens, endangered ethnicities, many children, those with disabilities, single women are receiving social assistance. Many, many countries have said, we know that these groups are vulnerable. We know who these groups are already, and we know there's a way for the government to get the money. Let us increase their benefits temporarily. So that's one typical response in many countries when it comes to social protection. Second, there's a second group, and this is where informal sectors would fit in. And they don't necessarily have to be poor. Because they're not already a recipient of a government program, the idea is that the fastest thing that can be done is to provide them with some extra cash, some temporary cash transfers. And these may be new transfers. Not all countries have transfers for informal sectors. In fact, many don't. Then there's the third population, which is formal sector workers, which often includes government. As in the case of Nepal, there's a lot of discussion, and in many countries, there's wage subsidies so that they can keep working, so that they can be kept under employment, unemployment benefits, but also sometimes when a contribution is expected, that contribution is waived. So those are global examples of what type of responses there have been to social protection. In Nepal, the government has responded in terms of policies. All of you will recall, whether it be, particularly in the budget speech, and that came in some senses, the preparation of that was after COVID had hit. The government has announced many programs as responses and have expanded many programs as responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that includes food for work, subsidy for apprenticeships so that more people can be learning on the job, but still getting something. More skills training, particularly for migrant workers and those who are returning to the labor market or having to come into a new type of work. Looking at restructuring the agriculture sector, looking at sort of small farmers credit programs, helping to focus on SMEs where there are many people who are working informally and one of the biggest programs that the government is hoping to see as a part of the response to COVID is the Prime Minister's employment program. So I'll spend a little bit more time on this because this is a social protection program that has a lot of potential. And that is because it is a program that is set up to first implement the constitutional right to work, but second provides an employment guarantee of 100 days. However, the reality is despite having started in 2018, 2019, and it has not been able to actually achieve what it has intended to set out. Despite that, because it is a program that has potential, and you can imagine if somebody who's not able to get work gets an employment guarantee of 100 days, what a difference that can make. At about 517 rupees is the national wage rate that they're talking about. At 100 days, for any family, that could make such a difference. So this year, what the government has done is they have almost doubled the budget from last year. And the target that they've set out is to target 200,000 people. So that's the Prime Minister's employment program. Now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about sort of what we as the World Bank are trying to do in helping the government in this response. Suresh also mentioned the Yeti project. And that's a project that I lead, that the World Bank is supporting the Ministry of Labor, particularly Labor, Employment and Social Security, to implement. So I want to talk a little bit about this project in terms of its potential and its design. And then we will, then there's the realities of what can be done this year as COVID response. So the way this project is designed is to build on the design of the Prime Minister's employment program. Under the Prime Minister's Employment Program at every local government, so all 753, there is the establishment of an Employment Service Center. And as far as I know, in 80 to 90%, there is also an Employment Service Coordinator already. The idea is that it is making life easier for anybody who's looking for any type of work. You should be able to go there and say, I am looking for work, I don't have anything. I am unemployed, and you're pointed towards a 100 days temporary employment program. You have experience, you have skills, but you just don't know where to find work. That helps you look at the jobs portal that can help you find a longer term permanent solution. But the government also has so many other programs that the Employment Service Center can bring these together in a very sort of intersectoral approach to responding to employment. You know, we know about programs that provide skills training, that provide support in migration, that provide support for people to be more productive in terms of business development. The MEDPA program of the government on micro-enterprise. There's a program on self-employment for youth. But many people just don't know about these programs and don't know how to access them. So one of the ways that the Employment Service Center would be changing the way employment is provided in Nepal is helping people with access. I remember there was an ILO study done, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. And it was very sad to hear that the only job that came to people's doorsteps was migration. And that for the most young people who found work in Nepal, it was because of somebody they knew, somebody, either a family friend or a family network, who already had something that they could be provided with. So you imagine all the people who are not part of the network. And a lot of times the people in the informal sector are not part of this network, have so much of a harder time finding improvements in their employment. And the idea would be that an employment service center can help do that. The back end of this is that there would be an employment information system. So when you go and register, you are registering in this employment service center and you can be guided through many of these opportunities. So the YETI program would be providing support to the employment service centers, to MOLIS, to this national database that will help link up employers and employment, link up the public and the private sector, link up all of these opportunities, and support the government in its provision of 100 days of temporary employment. But in addition, also ensure that the most vulnerable of these people are also given 50 days of on-the-job skills training so they can break out of this cycle that they are stuck in. And as part of the support to the government this year, because of COVID, we're increasing the amount of money that we're investing this year so that the government is able to reach from our financing this year only, not just 30,000 people, but 75,000 people. Now, those are our plans, and we'll have to really support government and work with them because, as you know, times are very challenging and even more challenging. But that is not the only thing that the government can do. When it comes to labor and employment and the response to COVID, there are several things that we're looking at. One, and this is things that we've shared with government through various ways, whether it be Ministry of Labor, Employment, other donors, Ministry of Finance. There are some things that have to be done now. And in some senses, now we've passed the now in some senses. Relief, emergency cash transfer, delivering food, microgrants, some of these things. At the same time, we also need to realize as the economy opens up a little bit, we will also be able to deploy public work programs, get people some work that is also helping local governments develop, expand their infrastructure, expand their services. At the same time, what Nepal doesn't have is a social registry, a registry of people and their vulnerabilities. So when it comes to trying to identify people, including informal sector people, including those who are missing in that sense, who are invisible to the government, one of the things that the government can do in terms of a medium-term recovery modality is start the social registry. It will also mean more efficiency because not every program has to register every single person. Once you have your data in, you don't have to go and register over and over again. In the longer term, government needs to think about how they implement some of these programs, looking at the designing of some of the existing programs and how they can respond better to crisis, right? Redesigning some of these programs, but also thinking about productive inclusion. Simply providing 100 days of work is not going to make somebody more productive. It may help them survive this year, but adding to that, so plus, adding, for example, to temporary employment opportunities, adding skills as an example. looking at informal sector workers and how they can have some sort of contributory scheme that the government can help subsidize so that they are able to, in times of crisis, have the type of social protection support that many in the formal sector have. So these are just examples that are possible for the government to do even more when it comes to labor employment and the response to COVID, including for those in the informal sector. So I will stop here for now, and I believe we'll take a round of questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, madam, for rich and informative presentations. So I would like to go for the next presentation. So for the next presentation, I would like to request Narayan Bhattarai sir. Narayan sir, over to you.
Thank you, Suresh and everybody. Let me open my presentation here. Did you see it? Hello?
China sir. China sir.
Hold on. Oh, sorry, share screen. Ayo,
I sir, we like presentation board. Sorry.
Ayo?
Hazir sir.
Okay. Okay, thank you everybody. I think having these two presentations by Sureshji and also by Jasminji, there are a lot of overlaps. I realized, so I will skip those what is already covered by Jasminji and Sureshji, and just discuss about the perspective from labor rights. That is what I have been working since last many years. My presentation outline is, I will just talk about a little bit about the characteristics of informal economy, giving some additional ideas from the perspective of labor rights and how it is impacting on COVID, and I will discuss about the way forward and what policy options and what labor rights perspective options we may have in Nepal. So this is my presentation. So talking about the informal economy and its informal sector, there are two things are very important. One is about why we are talking about this informal economy or informal sector or informal workers' rights is twofold, issue. One is about taxation issues. Governments wants to regulate employments, regulate industries, or regulate all kind of employment relationship to generate revenue. For that perspective, governments wants to bring all informal sectors into its fold through its law, tax law, and tariff law, and all those things. And more than that is the perspective from the labor rights, because as we have been discussing from this last two presentation also, we discussed that in the informal economy there will be a situation of vulnerability, of exploitation. It may have different implications like forced labor, child labor, trafficking, all those bad phenomenon that would tend to exploit the workers, and they will keep them in the situation of poverty for a long time. So these two aspects are very much important while defining informal economy or informal workers. And when we go through this concept of decent work, all the informal economy is considered to be a sector with decent work deficit that we can talk about. And just briefly, what decent work consists is, it talks about the fair income, fair wages to workers that meets their lives, the needs of their lives. And it talks about social security and social protection at workplace that Jasmine and Suresh has already explained very, very well. And it is about the emergency situation like COVID-19 now. And it talks about dignity at work and freedom to leave the jobs, or freedom to change the employment whenever the workers wish. So this perspective is very much important. And the fourth important element is about non-discriminatory practices at work. We can see a lot of gender disparity in the world of work. Women are getting less paid. Women are getting the less wage rates, even for the same value of work in the informal economy. We can get many examples. For example, in Nepal, in agriculture sector, if a husband and wife go and work together in a field, in many villages, they work for the same value of work, same duration, but women are paid less and men are paid more. So this kind of discriminatory practices exist in informal economy. So if we think of the perspective of the decent work, that probably brings more remedy measures for us. The other important aspect is about in the informal economy, the countries have not been able to generate jobs or provide the options for people. In a way, the population growth is being much higher than the economic growth, and there is no redistribution. So this is creating big gap in the poor and the rich people. So these are all the characteristics of the informal economy. And as I have said that the increasing poverty, child labor, forced labor, and labor migration, all these phenomena takes place when there is increasing informal economy without regulations and all that.
सर को त्यो स्लाइड मुभ भइरहेछ छैन सर, उसमा पीपीटी उस मोडमा लानु नि एकचोटी, अनि सरले कुन स्लाइड रिफर गरिराख्नु छ.
Is it coming? Did we go to another
यो फर्स्ट स्लाइडमै छ सर, सरको चाहिँ मोड चाहिँ. हजुर
आयो गोल आयो
छैन सर,
छैन आउनु पर्ने त किन यहाँ त मेरोमा त त्यही देखाइरहेछ.
यसमा चाहिँ स्टेबल के रे एकदमै भएको छ, स्ट्याटिक भएको छ.
फर्स्टमै छ अझै स्टिल
फर्स्टमै छ सर.
Probably it's because of the internet. I don't know what is going on. Let me okay, 1 second. It's not coming.
अहिले मुभ भयो.
आयो
हजुर
आयो.
Oh, the ILO has always been advocating for human rights, for social justice. It's human rights mean all rights of workers. They should get the right to work freely. They should get proper wages. They should get social protection. And all those are the core elements of the ILO, bringing social justice into the world of work. If you define this decent work, it is about, in ILO's terminology, it's about the aspiration of people. It talks about the working lives of people that provides fair income and social security and social protection for their families, and the dignity to work. They should have freedom to raise their voices through their unions and all those, and giving equal opportunity for men and women. These are the concepts of decent work that would be probably more suitable in the long run for bringing informal workers or informality out to the formal way. And ILO has always been focusing about four strategic areas, 4 pillars for promoting decent work in the world of work. That is employment creation, one of them, and the other is fundamental principles and rights at work, which includes all kind of rights for work, social protection for them, the fixed working hours, minimum wage, all those things. And social protection, we have been discussing this quite a lot, and social dialogue, which is very, very, very important, bringing the tripartite constituencies together, workers, employers, and government, to discuss and frame their policies and implement them that reaches to all kind of workers. So these four pillars will be very much important, and in the context of COVID also, these are very much important, that we should bring on board the 3 sectors of the world of work to sit together and form the policies to fight COVID impact. I am not going to discuss much about this, what is the impact of the COVID informal economy. As we have been discussing, this immediate impact is losing jobs, hunger, anxiety, and increasing societal cases. We have been seeing that through different media. And another very important impact is on children's education. Probably we will be losing, all our children will be losing 1 year sessions. Now it has been almost 5 or 6 months that the schools have been closed. And definitely we should think of different ways of, reopening the schools. I was just talking about one of my relatives in my village, which is in Bhojpur, a remote area from here. And there are no COVID cases in that particular village so far, but all schools are closed. How surprisingly our policies, we are talking about big policies, but we are not making them that would really bring changes to the lives. We couldn't have done flatly, all the schools closed, and then, from this federal level, where the children actually could have gone to the schools where there were no, COVID cases. So this is just an example that I'm giving. And I'm not going to talk about much about this. Is the big impact on small and medium job enterprises. Many of them, we can get an example. If some entrepreneurs have taken a loan from bank, and he could have started running a taxi just before the COVID, and we can think of his situation, how he has been coping up this, because of this lockdown. And increasing vulnerability, I don't want to expand this much about child and forced labor. Just want to share with you that the child labor in Nepal has been decreasing over years. That is a good sign. We had this 1.6 million child labor that Suresh has presented, but I just want to inform you that there is less child labor based on the new, child labor report, which will be coming soon. We are working on it. It's almost coming into the final stage, which unveils that almost 1.1 million child labor, 10 lakh, लगभग 11 लाख को हाराहारीमा अहिलेको नयाँ child labor को data, and त्यसमध्येमा West from child labor saying it has decreased quite significantly, almost 222,000 in West Palms out of them. And lockdown, since lockdown started, there has been an impact on all these sectors. Migrant workers, the workers are stranded in different countries. Government is trying to bring, and now what happened is that whether it is the workers from brick kilns, whether it is the workers from construction sites in Nepal, they were the internal migrant coming from one village to other village, one district to another district, or one part to another part. Now they had to face a lot of problem going back to their homes. once they reach back to their home, they have been now without any empty, you can see empty pockets. Now they are returning back again to India. We have seen this, in the recent newspaper from western part of Nepal. Many of the Nepali workers are now going back to India. So this is the situation. And I don't want to talk much about the self-employed, street vendors, small shopkeepers. Everyone is impacted out of this COVID situation. I just want to now highlight about what can be done to cope up with this crisis. In a short term, we should have protection measures for workers and employees from virus, corona protection measures, relief materials, cash transfer to vulnerable families, and in the medium term, probably government has also been taking some initiatives on it. Rebate on taxes, bank interest, alternative skill training to vulnerable groups. That actually should be much focused. And if we want to, really target to those who is hardest hit, we have to probably prioritize these groups: casual workers, disadvantaged groups, the lead communities, indigenous communities who are in a bigger crisis rather than other other people. And in the long run, as Jasmine had highlighted about a lot of social protection and social security schemes, we all should focus on the areas with the decent work deficit. Again, I will say that extending social protection flow to reach out to vulnerable families. The contribution-based social security system that government has recently announced, it has just covered 172,000 workers so far. You can imagine which is roughly 2.5%, or even it will be a little less, because this informal economic workers data is sometimes different in different areas. So you have to register, and whenever we have been raising this issue with the government or with workers organizations, the government is asking the workers to register first, and then their employers will go and register them into the social security scheme. Unless we ease this kind of difficulties, our workers, and there is not a system how they can register, where they can register. Imagine our workers working in a brick kiln, how and where they can register. They don't have anything. So government should take a political will to, in fact, start this registration system. For me, what I could have suggested is that, irrespective of employers to register them into the social security fund, the workers, they should have given a social security ID card without that to be linked with the employer. And wherever they go, they can show their card, the social security card, and then ask their employers to contribute to social security fund. This way, if the registration is given to workers, probably it will be much easier. So the stakeholders should take this kind of initiatives to bring workers into the social security fund. Otherwise, we will just be talking of this social security only for the formal workers who are already getting this provident fund, or citizens investment trust, or all old age pension and everything, and the informal workers will be left out, and we should think about this seriously. And another important thing I want to raise here is that our government's revenue spending in social cause. You can think of the situation of the labor ministry, which has to regulate the work of entire workforce, which is almost more than 7 million workers, and their situation. the budget they are getting 11 labor offices and almost 20 labor officers nearly, and how they are going to monitor the labor rights, how they are going to monitor whether the workers are getting at least this 13,450 minimum wage. The labor force survey, recent labor force survey itself indicates that 37%, almost 37% of the total workforce are below the minimum wage. If they could have, monitor well and provided with this, at least this minimum wage, they could have a little bit, easy way out from this COVID crisis. And we should review our policy, keeping social justice in the core element. That is how I want to present. And the last, the policy option, what I have been feeling I want to share with you all is that government has been trying to generate employment from the labor ministry. This had some kind of, what you call it, because the Ministry of Labor's particular work is to regulate. It cannot create. I just want to give a small example. Jasmine ji has made a presentation about these employment centers. When I was working with Halia people in the far west, providing them skill training, and I went to some of the labor employment centers, and then try to find whether these trained the free Haliyas can be brought to these employment centers for jobs. The employment center officials told me that there are a list of workers registered here, but no any employers are asking us, or there is not employment creation from that employment center. But why? Because the private sector were a little bit reluctant to bring workers from that center with the argument that they will ask for minimum wage, they will ask for appointment letter, they will ask for this and that. So it is better not to go through that employment center. And what I thought is that we should definitely take this role out. The Ministry of Labor should just monitor the regulate the system, the labor law provisions, and employment creation should be given to some other ministry, either separate ministry or maybe the Ministry of Industry, so that there is much comfort from the private sectors to generate employment. This is what I felt. This will be a probably policy discussion for the future. This is based on my understanding. This is not an academic, all these, exercise, but my experience. Okay, that's it. If there are any questions, I would be ready to welcome, or different opinions, I would be ready to welcome them. Thank you, Ramji.
Thank you so much, sir, for the presentation. I would like to thank all the speakers for their comprehensive presentations, especially Suresh sir and Nan sir. Now we are going for the second session. That's a question answer and discussion session. As we have some questions in the chat box as well, but I hope the question raisers are still here. So it would be better to ask the questions by themselves by unmuting the microphone. So I'll announce the name and request them for the questions. I have seen that Helen Serpa, who is the country director of World Education International, she has raised some concerns, questions. So Helen, are you still there? I think she's not there. Then I'll go for Govinda Nepani, sir. Sir, are you there?
हजुर म छु नमस्ते
Yeah, sir.
हजुर सुरु गरौँ हेलो
हजुर हुन्छ सर
हजुर हुन्छ मेरो डाइरेक्ट क्वेसन टाइम बचाउने हिसाबले धेरै राम्रो प्रेजेन्टेसन थ्याङ्क यू सो मच तीनजनै प्रेजेन्टरलाई र मेरो क्वेसन चाहिँ यो क्यास ट्रान्सफर हेलो सुनिराखिया छ हेलो के अरे क्या होइन त्यो झलक्क त्यो गयो कि त्यो स्क्रिन त्यसले गर्दा अनि यो क्यास ट्रान्सफरमा चाहिँ हामीले विशेष गरी अब हामी सिभिल सोसाइटी एनजिओ सेक्टरबाट त निकै एडभोकेसी गऱ्यौँ तर वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्कको तर्फबाट र यो आइएलओ अब युएनको तर्फबाट पनि अलिकति त गर्नुभयो तर वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्क विशेष गरी डोनरहरूको तर्फबाट के भयो होला त्यसमा अलिकति पोलिसी इन्फ्लुएन्स गरेर अब संसारले क्यास ट्रान्सफर गरिरहेको छ जुन चाहिँ साध्यै राम्रो मेजर हो अहिलेको केसमा कोभिडको रिस्पोन्सको लागि चाहिँ त्यसमा चाहिँ के भइरहेको छ अथवा के गर्न सकिन्छ त्यसलाई अलिकति अझै हाइलाइट गरिदिनु भए राम्रो हुन्थ्यो अर्को चाहिँ यो जुन सोसियल प्रोटेक्सनमा यहाँहरूको प्रेजेन्टेसनमा यो रोल अफ सिभिल सोसाइटी रोल अफ डोनर्स रोल अफ यो गभर्मेन्ट प्राइभेट सेक्टर सबैको रोल छ उत्तिकै त्यसलाई पनि अलिकति हाइलाइट गरिदिएर ल्याउन सकेर त्यही लाइनमा चाहिँ हामी सबै अब हाम्रो सुरेश सरले चुन्नु भएको छ मल्टी स्टेक होल्डर इनिसिएटिभ सुरु गर्नुपर्छ भनेर त्यो अलिकति रोल पनि आयो भने अनि असाध्यै राम्रो हुन्थ्यो र यसैको आधारमा हामीले पोलिसी इन्फ्लुएन्स गर्ला अब पोलिसी के डिस्कोर्स हो यो होइन त्यो एउटा अनि अर्गनाइजर साथीहरूलाई चाहिँ पोलिसी लेभलका साथीहरू कति हुनुहुन्छ यसमा आज कसले सुन्नु भएको छ मिनिस्ट्री अफ लेबरका साथीहरू हुनुहुन्छ कि हुनुहुन्न अथवा अरू सोसियल वुमन मिनिस्ट्रीको अरू लाइन मिनिस्ट्रीहरू यसमा कतिको हुनुहुन्छ त्यो पनि मेक स्योर गरौँ किनभने हामी सिभिल सोसाइटी या डोनरतिरका साथीहरू त कुरा गरि नै राख्छौँ जहिले पनि तर सुन्ने मान्छेहरूले चाहिँ अब त्यो कहिले पुग्ने होइन कहिले सुन्ने हुन त सुनेर पनि यहाँ अलिकति टाइम लाग्छ तैपनि एटलिस्ट सुन्नुभयो भने केही न केही सेन्सिटाइज हुन्छ उहाँहरूले पोजिटिभ साथीहरू त जहाँ पनि हुनुहुन्छ अलिकति यो इस्युलाई इन्फ्लुएन्स गर्नलाई माथि सरकारी लेभलमा पनि होइन इभन डोनरको लेभलमा अब डोनरको साथीहरू त हुनुहुन्छ नै यहाँ हस् त्यति 2-3टा मेरो कन्सर्न क्वेसन धन्यवाद है त साह्रै राम्रो प्रोग्राम भयो
हस् थ्याङ्क यू सर सुरेश सरबाट सुरु गरौँ त्यसपछि जसमिन म्याम नारायण सरसँग रिलेटेड भयो भने सरले पनि एड गर्नुहुन्छ
हुन्छ हस् थ्याङ्क यू राम सर गोविन्द सरले उठाउनु भएको जिज्ञासा चाहिँ मेरो पनि प्रश्न हो बाइ द वे साँच्चै भनिदिउँ भने यो क्यासको विषय चाहिँ तपाईँ हामी एउटै बोर्डका छौँ त्यस कारण क्यासको पर्टिकुलर क्यासको विषय चाहिँ मेरो पनि कन्सर्न हो मैले एकपटक मैले नेपालीमै गरेँ यहाँ नन नेपाली स्पिकर सायद हुनुहुन्छ कि हुनुहुन्न कि जस्तो लाग्यो रामजी
हेलेनजी हुनुहुन्छ तर उहाँ नेपाली राम्रो बुझ्नुहुन्छ जस्तो लाग्छ है मलाई
ओके एनिवे वास्तवमा अर्थसँग पनि अर्थको चाहिँ वैदेशिक महाशाखा प्रमुखसँग पनि एक प्रकारको मेरो बहस भएको थियो कि हामीले यसलाई किन इग्नोर गर्यौँ भनेर म त्यतातिर गइनँ अब यसमा लार्जर एक्टर भनेको अब जस्तो वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्कहरू जस्तो अथवा युएन एजेन्सीहरू जस्तो त्यो लार्जर एक्टरहरूले अलिकति इन्फ्लुएन्स गर्न सकिने ठाउँ छ यद्यपि उहाँले गर्नुभएको होला र त्यो त म पनि चाहिँ सुन्न चाहन्छु जस्मिनजीहरूसँग अब ठ्याक्क मेरोमै सरले जुन अब अलिकति यो मल्टी स्टेक होल्डरको मा अलिकति आइडिया हुन्थ्यो भन्ने कुरा जुन सरले निकाल्नु भयो वास्तवमा मैले खोजेकै यही हो सर कि हामी जति पनि यो प्रोग्राममा छौँ उहाँहरूको अलिकति मैले चाहिँ ब्रेनमा स्ट्राइक गराउन खोजेको हो किनभने हुनसक्छ मसँग यसको ठ्याक्कै एन्सर नहुन सक्छ मैले अब यसका केही पृष्ठभूमि छन् फर इक्जाम्पल आइएम सरी आइएम अगेन कमिङ विथ यति जस्तो अब यति राम्रै जाला आई एम नट एगेन्स्ट यतिले जुन ट्रेनिङका पार्टहरू गरेको छ अब प्रत्येक चाहिँ गाउँपालिका नगरपालिकामा तपाईँको सर्भिस सेन्टरहरूलाई चाहिँ इन्हान्स गर्ने कामहरू वन्डरफुल कामहरू भएको छ तपाईँको डेटाबेसहरू बन्ने धेरै राम्रो कुराहरू छन् तर अब हामीले एउटा बुझ्नुपर्ने कुरा के छ भने हाम्रो पास्ट लेगासी जस्तो अब फ्रेङ्कली स्पिकिङ यो कुनै पोलिटिकल पार्टी र नीतिगत कुराहरू भन्दा पनि हामीले देखेको भएको कुराहरू हो प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स इम्प्लोइमेन्ट प्रोग्रामबाट लास्ट इयरको प्रोग्रामहरू जति गए इभन तत्कालीन चाहिँ लेबर मिनिस्टर आफैले पनि एग्री गरेको विषय हो कि हामीले सोचे अनुसार गर्न सकेनौँ भने पछाडि एउटा भनिन्छ नि तपाईँको चाहिँ एउटै चिज गरेर फरक परिणामको अपेक्षा गर्नु त मूर्खता हो अब हामीलाई थाहा छैन लेबर मिनिस्ट्री अथवा प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स इम्प्लोइमेन्ट प्रोग्रामले के ड्रास्टिक चेन्ज गरेर अलिकति नयाँ चाहिँ ढङ्गबाट गरिदियोस् नयाँ परिणाम आओस् त्यो हाम्रो अभिलाषा हो अब यसबाट के कुरा बुझिन्छ भने कहिलेकाहीँ तपाईँको यो गभर्मेन्टको ब्युरोक्रेटिक चाहिँ कन्फाइनमेन्टबाट पनि बाहिर जानुपर्छ कि त्यो यदि प्रधानमन्त्री चाहिँ इम्प्लोइमेन्ट कार्यक्रम अलिकति मल्टी स्टेकहोल्डर भएको भए हामीले सोसियल मोबिलाइजेसनको पाटो एउटालाई दिन सक्थ्यौँ होला तपाईँको इम्प्लोइमेन्टको पाटो अब गभर्मेन्टका चाहिँ इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर र सर्भिस डेलिभरीमा अर्को पाटोबाट गर्न सकिन्थ्यो होला त्यहाँ अलिकति प्रोग्रामको इनइफेक्टिभ हुने सम्भावनाहरूलाई हामीले चेक गर्न सक्थ्यौँ अब अर्को प्रसङ्ग म यहाँ ठ्याक्कै जोड्न चाहन्छु अब अहिले अर्को एउटा बहस भइरहेको छ लेबर मिनिस्ट्रीमा कि लेबर ब्याङ्क बनाउने लेबर ब्याङ्क चाहिँ फेरि त्यो लेबर ब्याङ्क पनि प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स इम्प्लोइमेन्ट प्रोग्राम भित्र नै लैजाने भन्ने कुरा आइरहेको छ अब मेरो बहस भइरहेको थियो ठिक छ द्याट इज गुड आइडिया पहिलो कुरो उहाँहरूको टार्गेट के त भन्दा लेबर ब्याङ्क बनाउँदा उहाँहरूले चाहिँ यो इन्फर्मल सेक्टर मध्ये पनि यो नन एग्रिकल्चरलाई त्यति धेरै चाहिँ कन्सिडर गरेको मैले पाइनँ मैले उहाँलाई त्यतिखेर भने कि एग्रिकल्चर सेक्टरमा लेबर ब्याङ्कको जति आवश्यकता छ हामीलाई यत्रो इन्फ्लक्स छ माइग्रेन्ट वर्करहरू छन् अब ब्रिक फ्याक्ट्रीमा कार्यरत मजदुरहरू छन् कार्पेटमा छन् होजियारीमा छन् तपाईँको स्ट्रिट भेन्डर छन् अब धेरै कुराहरू छन् जसले केही न केही स्किल त उनीहरूलाई जरुरी हुन्छ होला नि त भने त्यो उहाँहरूलाई पनि हामीले एकाउन्ट फर गर्ने कि नगर्ने अर्को कुरा इम्प्लोइमेन्ट जेनेरेटको कुरा गर्दै जाँदा नयाँ इम्प्लोइमेन्ट जेनेरेट गर्न त यो महाभारतको कुरो छ किनभने भइरहेको मिसनरी चलाउन नसकेको अवस्थामा नयाँ इम्प्लोइमेन्ट जेनेरेट हुँदैन प्याचअप इम्प्लोइमेन्ट जेनेरेसनले काम हुँदैन त्यसको लागि बरु थोरै चाहिँ लगानी गरेर हामीले यो मुर्छाएका भन्छ नि तपाईँको अलमोस्ट कोल्याप्स हुन लागेको चाहिँ इन्फर्मल सेक्टरका केही इन्टरप्राइजेसहरूलाई थोरै राहतले त्यसलाई रिभाइभ गर्न सकियो भने तपाईँको त्यो आफै जब क्रिएसन होइन र त्यस अर्थमा यति धेरै तपाईँको मल्टिपल जुन रोलहरू छ नि त्यो चाहिँ मलाई लाग्छ कुनै पनि एजेन्सीले गर्न सक्दैन त्यसकारण यसको लागि एउटा कम्प्रिहेन्सिभ प्याकेज भयो भने गभर्मेन्टको रोल यो हुने तपाईँको भनौँ न अब सोसियल सेक्टरको रोल यो हुने डोनरको रोल यो हुने भन्ने किसिमबाट जान पायो भने चाहिँ हामी यो पहिलेदेखिको स्टेरियोटाइप अफ प्रोजेक्ट एप्रोच छ नि त्यो प्रोजेक्ट एप्रोच भन्दा माथि जान सकिन्थ्यो कि अब फ्रेङ्कली स्पिकिङ यो भयावह अवस्थामा यो स्टेरियोटाइप अफ प्रोजेक्ट एप्रोचले बनाएको र ल्याएको कुनै पनि चिजले काम गर्दैन त्यसमा अब हामीले यसलाई म्यासिभ इनिसिएटिभ र क्याम्पेनमा जानुपर्छ इट टेक्स टाइम त्यस कारण मैले यो कन्सर्न मात्रै जेनेरेट गर्न सकेको हो गर्न चाहेको हो गोविन्द सर मैले सरको जिज्ञासालाई एड्रेस गरेँ कि गरिनँ थ्याङ्क यू
ठिक छ सर एकदम धन्यवाद
हजुर म अलिकति थपौँ त है सो गोविन्दजीले भन्नुभएको एउटा इस्युमा पहिला म जान्छु अनि अलिकति त्यसबाट उहाँले दुईवटा इस्यु प्रश्नहरू उठाउनु भएको थियो त्यसपछि सुरेशजीकै कन्भर्सेसनमा कन्टिन्यू गरौँ जस्तो लाग्यो सो एउटा चाहिँ क्यास ट्रान्सफरमा मैले प्रेजेन्टेसनमा पनि भने यहाँले पनि भन्नुभयो यस्तो खालको इमर्जेन्सीमा सोसल प्रोटेक्सनमा सबभन्दा ग्लोबली नै हेर्ने हो भने क्विक एक्सन र क्विक इम्प्याक्ट ल्याउन सक्ने भनेकै क्यास ट्रान्सफर हो चाहिँ ग्लोबली नै भइसकेको एभिडेन्सै भइसकेको भयो र तपाईँले भन्नुभयो जस्तो सिभिल सोसाइटीबाट पनि डोनर्सहरूबाट पनि यसमा एकदमै धेरै पुश भएको थियो जस्तो मलाई थाहा भएसम्म चाहिँ वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्कको कन्ट्री डाइरेक्टरले अर्थमन्त्रीसँग पनि यो कुरा गरे अभियसली नोट्सहरू हामीले तयार गर्दा पनि त्यो लेभलसम्म पनि यो कुरा पुग्यो र हामीले चाहिँ त्यसमा चाहिँ अब तीनटा इस्युहरू उठ्छ होइन अब एज वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्क चाहिँ हामी अरू डोनर्सभन्दा अलिक फरक किन छौँ भने हामीले पोलिसी इन्फ्लुएन्सिङको पार्ट एउटा भयो भने हाम्रो प्रोजेक्टहरूको फाइनेन्सिङ हेर्यो भने त्यो लोनै हो सो त्यो कुराहरू पनि आउँछ तर हामीले वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्कको लागि भनेको होइन यो नेपाल सरकारले आफ्नो पैसाबाट ग्रान्ट पैसाबाट लोन पैसाबाट डजन्ट म्याटर होइन तर सबभन्दा फर्स्ट इम्प्याक्ट ल्याउन सक्ने भनेको क्यास ट्रान्सफर हो भने हामीले पनि धेरै उठायौँ एज डोनर्स डोनर ग्रुप एउटा सोसल प्रोटेक्सन टास्क टिम भन्ने छ अहिले चाहिँ वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्क लिड हो अस्तिसम्म युनिसेफको लिड थियो त्यो डोनर ग्रुपबाट पनि अर्थ मन्त्रालयबाट पनि प्लानिङ कमिसनलाई पनि यही कुराहरू हामीले रिपिटेडली राखेको थियौँ र मलाई जहाँसम्म थाहा छ यो सिभिल सोसाइटी ग्रुप एआइएनहरूले पनि यो कुराहरू राख्यो डिस्पाइट द्याट होइन नेपाल गभर्मेन्टले चाहिँ यो एक्सनमा अगाडि नजाने भन्यो र सँगसँगै जहाँ जहाँ आइएनजिओज एनजिओजहरूले यो काम थालेको थियो धेरै ठाउँमा यो काम पनि रोक्यो सो नेपालको केस चाहिँ अलिकति अनोमली नै छ यो क्यास ट्रान्सफर्समा तर अहिलेसम्म पनि हाम्रो हिसाबले हामीले चाहिँ पोलिसी इन्फ्लुएन्स टेक्निकल सपोर्टको हिसाबले यसलाई छोडेको छैन किन अहिले पनि अब अभियसली हामी सबैजनालाई थाहा छ अहिले पनि नेपालको केसमा यो जुन रिलिफको कन्ट्याक्ट छ सकेको छैन अहिले पनि whether it be temporary employment को workers को लागि अथवा informal sector workers को लागि cash transfers ले अहिले पनि काम गर्न सक्छ भनेर हामी अझै पनि त्यसमा in terms of policy influence in terms of high level policy छलफल त्यो कन्टिन्यू नै गरिरहेको छौँ सो त्यो चाहिँ cash transfers मा roles मा I think त्यो चाहिँ छलफल खास हाम्रो तिनटै प्रेजेन्टेसनमा त्यति आएन तर छलफलको हिसाबले I think त्यो राम्रो इस्यु एउटा हुन्थ्यो र मैले त्यसमा अब धेरै कुरा त नराखौँ very clearly जस्तो तपाईले याद छ भने त्यो मैले त्यो यतिको प्रोजेक्टमा एम्प्लोयमेन्ट सर्भिस सेन्टरलाई बीचमा राखेर प्रेजेन्टेसन गर्यौं one of the biggest हामीले अब एज वर्ल्ड बैंक हामीले काम गर्ने भनेको 99% हाम्रो फन्डिङ गभर्नमेन्टका जान्छ र हामीले टेक्निकल सपोर्ट पोलिसी इन्फ्लुएन्सिङ र हामी सुपरभिजन गर्छौं त्यसमा सबभन्दा ठूलो ग्याप देखेको भनेको मोबिलाइजेसन अफ पिपलमा हो र त्यहाँ चाहिँ सिभिल सोसाइटीको स्ट्रेन्थ छ र हामी इन्फर्मल सेक्टरको कुरा गर्ने हो भने अलिकति म नारायणजीले भन्नुभएको कुरामा पनि सुन्छु गभर्नमेन्टले आफ्नो रिचमा भएकोहरूलाई पहिला अवसरहरू दिन्छ रिच भन्दा एउटा इन्फर्मल हुन सक्छ सोशल नेटवर्किङको हिसाबले अर्को चाहिँ फर्मल जस्तै उदाहरणको लागि कुनै बच्चाको बर्थ रेजिस्ट्रेसन छ भने त्यसबाट अनि उसले चाइल्ड ग्रान्ट पाउन सक्ने भयो उदाहरणको लागि बर्थ रेजिस्ट्रेसन नगरेको बच्चा छ भने उ चाइल्ड ग्रान्टमा उसलाई चाइल्ड ग्रान्टमा एक्सेस हुँदैन हैन त्यो हिसाबले गभर्नमेन्टको आफ्नो सिस्टम्स लिमिटेड चाहिँ छ तर त्यो एक्सपेन्सन त्यो इन्क्लुजन हामीले कसरी ल्याउने भनेर हामीले फोकस गर्न पर्छ एउटा र त्यसमा चाहिँ सिभिल सोसाइटीको ठूलो भूमिका छ सो त्यो गोविन्दजीको सेकेन्ड पोइन्टमा अलिकति सुरेशजीको कन्भर्सेसनमा दुई तीनटा कुरा नि म एकैचोटि सुन्न खोज्छु होला मैले सुरुमा पनि भने है मलाई चाहिँ इन्डिभिजुअली भन्दाखेरि यति कार्यक्रम चाहिँ राम्रो डिजाइनको कार्यक्रम जस्तो लाग्छ जसले साँच्चै सक्सेसफुल भयो भने हैन इम्प्लिमेन्टेसन राम्रो भयो भने नेपालमा ठूलो चेन्ज ल्याउन सक्छ इम्प्लोयमेन्ट सेक्टरमा किनभने स्थानीय तहमा गएर एउटा मल्टी सेक्टरल अप्रोच चाहिँ गर्न खोजेको छ तर रियालिटी अब हामीले हेर्न पर्छ इम्प्लिमेन्टेसन क्यापेसिटी स्थानीय तह कुनै कुनैमा राम्रो गर्न सक्छन् कुनै कुनैमा सक्दैन होला श्रम मन्त्रालय पनि एक हिसाबले नयाँ छ तर सँगसँगै म के भन्छु भन्दाखेरि हामीले पनि अलि रियलिस्टिकली सोच्नु पर्छ प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स एम्प्लोयमेन्ट प्रोग्राम भनेको 2 वर्ष पुरानो मात्रै कार्यक्रम हो र फर्स्ट इयर त र पोलिसी र प्र्याक्टिसको कुरा हामी गर्छौं पोलिसी अनाउन्स हुन्छ नेपालमा तर त्यो प्रोग्राम तयार हुनलाई टाइम हुँदैन ठूलो अनाउन्समेन्ट गर्यो कार्यक्रम छ भन्यो तर त्यसको डिजाइनिङ खै त्यसको प्लानिङ खै त्यसको क्यापेसिटी बिल्डिङ खै अनि एक्सपेक्टेशन्सहरु मिट हुँदैन सो अलिकति हाम्रो यो पोलिसी र प्र्याक्टिसको कुरामा जुन ग्याप छ त्यसबाट अनि हामी अलरेडी डिसअपोइन्टमेन्टमा जान्छौं त्यसैले हामीलाई पनि यस वर्ल्ड बैंक हामीले यति प्रोग्राम चाहिँ पीएमईपी को डिजाइनको बेसिसमा गर्यौं तर रियालिटी पीएमईपी एउटा 10 वर्ष पुरानो कार्यक्रम होइन कार्यक्रम नयाँ छ त्यो कार्यक्रम अझै आफ्नै मान्छेहरुलाई आफ्नै स्टाफिङलाई क्यापेसिटी बिल्डिङ गरिरहेछ भने हाम्रो रियालिटीको एक्सपेक्टेसन चाहिँ फर्स्ट इयरमा स्लो हुन्छ अनफर्चुनेटली एक हिसाबले पेन्डेमिक अहिले भयो त्यसकारण आफूलाई पनि तयारी गर्दा गर्दा पेन्डेमिकलाई पनि रिस्पोन्ड गर्न पर्ने हुन्छ तर उदाहरणको लागि म के भन्छु नि कतिपय कुराहरू गभर्नमेन्टको ब्युरोक्रेसीमा रहेर पनि मोलेसले फर एक्जाम्पल राम्रो गरेको छ जस्तै अब तपाईले त्यति त्यो डिटेलमा हामी जान्दैनौं प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स एम्प्लोयमेन्ट प्रोग्रामको लागि एउटा लिस्ट अफ अनएम्प्लोयड चाहिन्छ कोलाई काम दिनु पर्यो भन्ने लिस्ट उहाँलाई चाहिन्छ त्यसकारण त्यो लिस्टको एउटा कट अफ डेट छ ताकि उहाँले प्लानिङ गर्न सक्नुहुन्छ अब यो वर्षको केसमा के भयो भने त्यो कट अफ लिस्ट चाहिँ कोभिडको बेला लकडाउनमा भयो भने धेरै मान्छेहरु त अनएम्प्लोयड भयो नयाँ भनौं न अनएम्प्लोयडै भयो भनौं न कोभिडले गर्दाखेरि उहाँ रेजिस्टर गर्न जान सक्नु भएन तर उहाँको पीएमईपी को नियम अनुसार त त्यो बन्द गर्न पर्यो टाइम उहाँले क्याबिनेट लगेरै त्यो टाइम फ्रेम एक्सप्यान्ड गरिदिनु भयो ताकि नयाँ कोभिडबाट अफेक्टेड मान्छेहरु पनि जो अब अनएम्प्लोयड हुनुहुन्छ उहाँले पनि रेजिस्टर गर्न चाहिँ एउटा अवसर पाउनुभयो सो विदिन ब्युरोक्रेसी पनि उहाँले काम चाहिँ गर्न प्रयास गरिराख्नु भएछ आफ्नै कार्यक्रम भित्र अब इम्प्लिमेन्टेसन स्पिडको कुरा छ, त्यो चाहिँ तपाईँले भन्नुहोस् गभर्मेन्ट ब्युरोक्रेसी कतिको फास्ट जान सक्छ प्रश्न भयो। नारायणजीले पनि यो कुरा उठाउनु भयो अनि अहिले सुरेशजीले पनि उठाउनु भयो अनि मैले पनि भने नि यो मिसिङ मिडलको कुरा। सो म फेरि पनि मैले मेरो फाइनल रेकमेन्डेसन्स पोलिसिजमा चाहिँ यो राखेको थिएँ, तर वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्क सोसल प्रोटेक्सन टिमको हिसाबले र हामीले अहिले गभर्मेन्टसँग कुरा गर्दाखेरि हामीले अहिले स्ट्रेस गरेर चाहिँ एउटा सोसल रेजिस्ट्री नै छ। सोसल रेजिस्ट्री भनेको लेबरर्सहरूको मात्रै होइन, सबैजनाको हुन्छ र एउटा मल्टी डाइमेन्सनल कलेक्सन अफ डेटा हुन्छ, डेमोग्राफिक डेटा सबै हुन्छ। त्यो भयो भने म एज एन इन्डिभिजुअल अहिले गएर सामाजिक सुरक्षाको लागि रेजिस्टर गर्ने, उता गएर अनइम्प्लोइमेन्टको लागि रेजिस्टर, उता गएर हेल्थ इन्सुरेन्सको लागि रेजिस्टर गर्न परेन। मेरो डेटा एक ठाउँमा छ, त्यो कार्यक्रमले तान्दिने हो, अब अपडेट गर्ने आफ्नो ठाउँमा छ हैन। तर अहिले इनएफिसियन्सीको हिसाबले पनि के हुन्छ भने त्यही बिचरा मान्छेको घरमा गएर सर्वे कतिजनाले गर्न जान्छ कि डेटा कलेक्सन फर प्रोग्राम प्लानिङ इनएफिसियन्सी है। र सँगसँगै एज अ व्यक्ति एज अ भनौँ न युजर अफ अल अफ दिस प्रोग्राम्स पनि त्यही डेटा कति दिने, फेरि त्यसमा गल्ती पनि हुन्छ। हेर्नुहोस्, एकचोटि मैले इङ्ग्लिसमा नाम लेख्यो, एकचोटि नेपालीमा नाम लेख्यो, एकचोटि चाहिँ यहाँ एउटा नम्बर मिलेन। सो सोसल रेजिस्ट्री भन्ने कन्सेप्ट हामीले नेपालमा ल्याइरहेछौँ, जो धेरै देशमा गरिसकेको छ र नेपालमा त्यसको फाउन्डेसनहरू छ हैन। जस्तो नेसनल आइडी आइरहेछ, हाम्रो सिटिजनसिपको डेटाबेस छ, त्यसमा युनिक आइडी नभए तापनि पोभर्टीको डेटाबेस छ, अहिले सिभिल रेजिस्ट्रेसन छ नेपालमा, अब कभरेज कम भए पनि यो फाउन्डेसन जुन छलाई हामीले सोसल सिक्युरिटीको 2.5 जति मिलियन पिपल जो हुनुहुन्छ उहाँहरू पनि अलरेडी रेजिस्टर्ड छ। त्यसको फाउन्डेसनमा बिल्ड गर्दै गयो भने अहिले होइन हैन, 2 वर्षमा पनि होइन, 5 देखि 10 वर्षको कुरा गरिरहेछौँ हामी। त्यो बेलासम्म सोसल रेजिस्ट्री बनाउन सक्यो भने जो त्यो सोसल रेजिस्ट्रीमा हुनुहुन्छ उहाँको आफ्नो भल्नरेबिलिटी अनुसार अनि नेपाल गभर्मेन्टले रिस्पोन्ड गर्न सक्ला कि भनेर एउटा सोसल रेजिस्ट्रीको कन्सेप्ट चाहिँ अहिले आइरहेको छ। अभियसली अब ब्युरोक्रेसीको कुरा पनि भयो, हामी भिजनको कुरा गरिरहेको छौँ, भोलि नै हुने काम होइन, तर एटलिस्ट नेक्स्ट क्राइसिसलाई पनि युज हुन सक्छ कि। हजुर, यति भन्दै अहिलेलाई म रोक्छु। थ्याङ्क यू।
थ्याङ्क यू म्याडम। नारायण सर केही छ सरको एड गर्नुपर्ने यसमा? अदरवाइज हामी नेक्स्ट क्वेसनमा जान्छौँ।
खासै केही छैन मेरो एड गर्नुपर्ने कुरा। अब यो क्यास ट्रान्सफर भन्ने कुरामा अलिकति पनि वास्तवमा उहाँहरूले हाम्रो ज्यास्मिनजी र हाम्रो सुरेशजीले भनेकै कुराहरूमा गर्छु। क्यास ट्रान्सफर सबभन्दा सजिलो गरी पुग्ने कुरा हो र विभिन्न देशहरूमा भइ पनि राखेको छ। अरू देशहरूमा अब नेपालमा चाहिँ अलिकति त्यो सम्भव हुन सकेको छैन होइन। अब विभिन्न संस्थाहरूले के गरिराखेका छन् यसमा भन्ने कुराहरू आउँदाखेरि हाम्रो आइएलओको कुरा गर्दाखेरि आइएलओ त अब त्यत्रो ठुलो डोनर फन्डिङ एजेन्सी होइन, यो टेक्निकल एजेन्सी मात्रै भएको हुनाले हाम्रो लिमिटेड रिसोर्सेसहरूलाई हामीले जस्तो यो कोभिड रेस्पोन्समा सुदूरपश्चिमको हलियाहरूको लागि हामीले केही सपोर्ट गरेका थियौँ आइएलओको प्रोजेक्टहरूबाट। त्यस्तै गरेर यो स्ट्रान्डेड वर्करहरू खास गरेर माइग्रेन्ट वर्करहरूलाई नेपालमा यो रिप्याट्रिएसन गर्ने सन्दर्भमा हेल्प गर्नको लागि मिनिस्ट्री अफ लेबरलाई पनि इन्भल्भ गराएर एनआरएनए मार्फत हामीले केही कामहरू गरेका छौँ। यति 2टा कुरा मात्रै म हाइलाइट गर्न चाहन्छु अहिले। अर्को त्यसपछि अरू क्वेसनमा जाउँला। ओके,
हस्, थ्याङ्क यू सर। हामीलाई च्याट बक्समा हाम्रो राम बिएमले क्वेसन्स सोध्न खोज्नु भएको छ। यदि तपाईँ त्यहाँ हुनुहुन्छ भने माइक अनम्युट गरेर तपाईँको क्वेसन सोध्न सक्नुहुन्छ। राम बिएम।
हुन्छ सर, हस्, धन्यवाद सर यहाँहरू सबैजनालाई। नमस्कार, म राम बुढामगर, म कपिल वस्तुबाट है सर। मेरो क्वेसन चाहिँ मोस्टली चाहिँ अब तिनैजनालाई चाहिँ कोसँग सुइटेबल हुन्छ। विशेष गरी मैले देखेको चाहिँ धेरै एक्सपर्ट्सहरूमा यो जुन आजभोलि यो अनलाइन यो चाहिँ मार्फतको यो चाहिँ भिजुअल मिटिङहरूमा कुरा गर्दा चाहिँ कोभिड-19 को इफेक्ट चाहिँ मोस्टली चाहिँ एग्रिकल्चर सेक्टरमा चाहिँ कम देखियो भन्ने चाहिँ सुनिन्छ। यद्यपि यहाँहरूले कुन आधारमा चाहिँ यो चाहिँ एग्रिकल्चरलाई चाहिँ कम चाहिँ आँक्नु भएको, इम्प्याक्ट देख्नु भएको? किनभने फार्मर्सहरूले उत्पादन गरेका कतिपय एग्रो कमोडिटिजहरू चाहिँ कृषकहरूले 3-4 महिना लगाएरै उत्पादन गरेका चिजहरू कोभिड के अरे कोरोना इन्फेक्टेड भयो भनेर चाहिँ अब ट्रकबाट चाहिँ फ्याँक्ने अनि अब यसमा केही नभए 90 डेज चाहिँ त्यहाँ चाहिँ टाइम लाग्छ, कन्ज्युम हुन्छ, उहाँहरूको लेबर हुन्छ, त्यत्तिकै उहाँहरूको चाहिँ इन्भेस्ट भइरहेको हुन्छ, त्यत्तिकै प्रडक्ट चाहिँ लियो अनि फार्मर्सबाट फाल्ने। अनि यसै गरी हामी म आफै पनि एउटा चाहिँ सानो चाहिँ अब लाइफ स्टक यो म चाहिँ के अरे चाहिँ अब फार्मर्स हो हैन, मेरो चाहिँ पशुपालन चाहिँ विशेष गरी बाख्रा पालन सानो चाहिँ कृषक हो म पनि। अनि काम गर्दा थुप्रै समस्याहरू जस्तै यो लकडाउनमा चाहिँ गाडी हिँड्नै दिँदैन अनि हामी जस्ता साना व्यवसायीहरूले पशुपालक कृषकहरूले दानाको व्यवस्थापन गर्न पर्ने हुन्छ। ठुलो एमाउन्टमा अब कमर्सियल्ली चाहिँ उहाँहरू भाइबल एकदम पहिलेदेखि भएकाहरूलाई चाहिँ म्यानेजमेन्ट फिड म्यानेजमेन्टको समस्या नहोला, तर हामी जस्ता भर्खर सुरुवात गरेका फार्मर्सहरूलाई गाउँमा त्यो चाहिँ फार्मर्सहरूको लागि चाहिँ दानाको व्यवस्थापनमा अति गाह्रो भयो। अनि सरकारले चाहिँ यतातिरबाट आएर के भन्छ गाडी हिँड्न पाइँदैन, गाडी हिँड्न पाएन। अनि अब हामी जस्ता कृषकहरूलाई न कुनै आइडी छ, न हामीहरूसँग आइडीको कार्ड व्यवस्था गरेको छ, न हामीहरूसँग चाहिँ कुनै त्यस्तो चाहिँ त्यो सिस्टम नै छलफलै गरेर के हामीहरूको चाहिँ एउटा चाहिँ सेफ ल्यान्डिङको कुनै वातावरणै तयार गरिदिएको छ। अनि हामी कहाँ चाहिँ अब फिड म्यानेजमेन्टको लागि चाहिँ हामीसँग त्यो ट्रेडर्सहरूसँग गऱ्यो, हामी चाहिँ अब 10 क्विन्टल होइन अब 1 टन 2 टनको चाहिँ म्यानेज भयो, हामी चाहिँ घरमै ड्रप गरिदिन्छौँ भने यत्रो ठुलो चाहिँ परिमाणमा चाहिँ हामी चाहिँ फिड म्यानेज गर्न सक्दैनौँ। अनि थोरै म्यानेजमेन्ट गर्दा यस्ता खालका समस्याहरू धेरै देखिएका छन्। तर एक्सपर्ट्सहरूले जति चाहिँ अब एग्रिकल्चरमा सजिलो गरी चाहिँ अब कम प्रभाव देखियो भन्दा चाहिँ यो चाहिँ हामी जस्ता साना चाहिँ फार्मर्सहरूको अरू अन्य कृषकहरूको लागि चाहिँ न्याय भयो जस्तो लाग्यो र यहाँहरूलाई यसमा यहाँहरूको चाहिँ साँच्चीकै यो चाहिँ अब डिटेल चाहिँ सर्वे गरेर गर्दा हो त भन्ने चाहिँ मेरो क्वेसन हो। थ्याङ्क यू।
थ्याङ्क यू। हाम्रो अर्को फणेन्द्र पाण्डेजीको क्वेसन्स पनि रिलेटेड छ, अलिकति यहाँ आफैले यसलाई अलिकति गर्नुहुन्छ, क्लारिफाई गर्नुहुन्छ। फणेन्द्र पाण्डे।
Thank you, Ramji. Thank you for the wonderful presentations. तीनैजना हाम्रो प्रेजेन्टरहरूलाई यो खास सप्लाई चेनको दृष्टिकोणले एग्रिकल्चरमा त्यति धेरै इम्प्याक्ट भएको होइन भन्ने कुराहरू आइरहेको छ भन्ने सन्दर्भ थियो। अर्को चाहिँ एग्रिकल्चरले चाहिँ अहिले मोस्टली रुरल अनइम्प्लोइमेन्टलाई चाहिँ कोभिड पछाडि चाहिँ अझ बढी एब्जर्भ गरिरहेको छ। त्यही भएर पनि एग्रिकल्चर सेक्टर चाहिँ त्यति धेरै प्रभावित छैन, अरू सेक्टर जस्तो होइन इन्फर्मल इकोनोमीमा भन्ने सन्दर्भमा यो क्वेसन भन्दा नि फुड फर थट रेज गरेको हो। र सेकेन्ड थट चाहिँ मेरो के थियो भन्नुहुन्छ भने जुन यो हाम्रो अहिले यति प्रोग्राम आएको छ, जस्मिनजीले प्रेजेन्टेसन गर्नुभएको थियो, अनि त्यो यति प्रोग्रामले चाहिँ कोअर्डिनेसन फेलियर्सहरूलाई चाहिँ अपर्च्युनिटीको रूपमा टर्न गर्न खोजे जस्तो पनि लाग्यो मलाई उहाँको प्रेजेन्टेसन देख्दाखेरि। मल्टी डाइमेन्सनल त्यो एउटा प्लेटफर्म बनाउन खोजेको जस्तो लाग्यो, इन लोकल गभर्मेन्ट इन अब सेन्ट्रल गभर्मेन्टदेखि इन्फ्लुएन्स गरेर होला। अब त्यसको लागि चाहिँ कुनै एउटा चाहिँ हामीले पहिला अपर्च्युनिटी लस गरेको कुनै डेटा ब्याकिङ थियो कि सर्टेन काइन्ड अफ वर्क्सहरूबाट चाहिँ कोअर्डिनेसन फेलियर भयो भन्ने त हामीले पोलिसी लेभलमा प्रोग्राम लेभलमा सुनिआएकै हो। तर वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्कबाट त्यस्तो कुनै डेटा अपर्च्युनिटी लसको कुनै एउटा क्वान्टिटेटिभ फिगर्सहरू छ भने त्यो पनि एकचोटि सुन्न पाऊँ भन्ने चाहिँ मेरो चाहना। ओभर, थ्याङ्क यू।
हस्, थ्याङ्क यू। अहिले हामी दुईटा क्वेसन रिलेभेन्ट भएको हुनाले यसलाई लिन्छौँ। यहीसँग रिलेटेड हो सर यो? हेलो ल सर, हजुर हुन्छ सर।
हजुर नमस्कार सबैजनालाई। एकदमै राम्रो प्रेजेन्टेसनको लागि धन्यवाद छ, धेरै कुरा सिक्न पाइयो। म चाहिँ डाक्टर निर्मल विश्वकर्मा, विशेष गरेर लाइभलीहुड फुड सेक्युरिटीमा अध्ययन अनुसन्धानहरू गर्छु। म अहिले चाहिँ एउटा यो प्रदेश नम्बर 2 र प्रदेश नम्बर 7मा सुदूरपश्चिम प्रदेशमा अहिले कोभिडले पारेको प्रभावमा विशेष गरेर माइग्रेन्ट लेबरहरूलाई कस्तो खालको अब नन एग्रिकल्चरल नन फार्म बेस्ड चाहिँ इम्प्लोइमेन्ट जबहरू क्रिएट गर्न सकिन्छ भन्ने कुराहरूमा त्यसमा अध्ययन गर्न लागिरहेको छौँ अहिले हाम्रो एउटा टिममा। मेरो क्वेसन चाहिँ नारायण सरसँग मिल्छ कि भन्ने लाग्छ मलाई। नारायण सरले चाहिँ अब सर्ट टर्म, मिडियम टर्म, लङ टर्मको कुराहरू पनि गर्नुभयो। लङ टर्ममा विशेष गरेर अलिक सोसियल जस्टिसको आधारमा पोलिसीहरू बनाउने कुरा गर्नुभयो। मेरो यसमा कन्सर्न अथवा इस्यु के हो भने जस्तै अहिले पैसा चाहिँ वास्तवमा गभर्मेन्टसँग छ, जस्तै नगरपालिकाहरूसँग पनि छ, प्रदेश सरकारसँग पनि छ भनेपछि अब सहरहरूले विशेष गरेर अहिलेको कोभिडको जुन चाहिँ अब यो पेन्डेमिक सिचुएसन छ यसलाई हेरेर यसको सिचुएसनलाई एनालिसिस गरेर प्रदेश र लोकल गभर्मेन्टको पोलिसीहरू स्ट्राटेजीहरू बनाउनलाई सहयोग गर्ने त्यस्तो खालको जबहरू इम्प्लोइमेन्ट क्रिएट गर्ने खालको अथवा फर्मल इन्फर्मल सेक्टरमा त्यस्तो के छ नारायण सरलाई क्वेसन, अरूलाई पनि हुनसक्छ तर मिल्ने त्यहाँ हो कि जस्तो लाग्यो। अनि अर्को क्वेसन के हो भने अब सरले धेरै भल्नेबल ग्रुपहरूको आइडेन्टिफाई गरेर राख्नु भएको छ त्यहाँ, तर हाम्रो अहिलेसम्मको प्रिलिमिनरी फाइन्डिङ के देखिन्छ भने त्यो ल्यान्डलेस पिपलहरू वास्तवमा धेरै भल्नेबल भएको पाइएको छ। अलिकति ल्यान्ड भएको मान्छेसँग के छ भने अहिले यो कोभिड कस्तो भयो भने बर्सातभन्दा अगाडि भयो, यसको इम्प्याक्ट बर्सातभन्दा अगाडि देखियो र जोसँग ल्यान्ड छ उसले चाहिँ कृषि गरेको छ, अहिलेसम्म दिएको सोसियल प्रोटेक्सनको भन्नु सहयोगहरू चाहिँ गभर्मेन्टको इन्टरभेन्सन अथवा यो प्रोजेक्टहरूको इन्टरभेन्सनमा पनि धेरै त्यस्तै ल्यान्ड भएको मान्छेले फाइदा पाइरहेको स्थिति छ। र भनेपछि यो एग्रिकल्चर सेक्टर कम इम्प्याक्ट भएको देखिन्छ तर ल्यान्डलेस मान्छेहरू बढी ल्यान्डलेसलाई नन ल्यान्ड बेस चाहिँ अब लाइभलीहुड र इम्प्लोइमेन्ट क्रिएट के गर्न सकिन्छ यसमा केही थट छ? यो दुई क्वेसन, इन्फर्मल सेक्टर जब इम्प्लोइमेन्टलाई कसरी इम्प्रुभ गरिन्छ त्यसमा सहयोग गर्ने स्ट्राटेजी के हुन सक्ला, अर्को चाहिँ नन गर्न सकिन्छ त्यसमा के छ सरले केही गरिरहनु भएको छ कि दुईटा भयो? धन्यवाद।
So thank you very much, sir. अहिलेलाई हामी तीनटा क्वेसन्स लिन्छौँ त्यसपछि नेक्स्ट राउन्डमा। So over to speakers, स्पेसली जस्मिन म्याम उहाँले टार्गेटै गरेर भन्नुभएको थियो, त्यसपछि सुरेश सर अनि नारायण सर।
हजुर हस् धन्यवाद। एग्रिकल्चरमा फर्स्ट म एग्रिकल्चरको एक्सपर्ट चाहिँ होइन त्यस कारण यसमा म धेरै कमेन्ट गर्दिनँ, तर हाम्रो साइडबाट एग्रिकल्चरको वर्कर्सहरूमा एफेक्ट भएको छैन हामी भन्दैन र सँगसँगै कोभिडको रिस्पोन्समा टुरिज्म र एग्रिकल्चरको दुईटा सेक्टरलाई चाहिँ टार्गेटै गर्नुपर्छ इन टर्म्स अफ इकोनोमीलाई अब एक्सेलरेट गर्नलाई नै हामी भन्छौँ। एग्रिकल्चरमा म त्यति भनेर रोक्छु। आई थिङ्क मलाई अलिकति डाइरेक्टली सोच्नु भएको भनेको फनिन्द्रजीको प्रश्न थियो। फनिन्द्रजी हामीले यतिको प्रोजेक्ट डिजाइनिङमा अपर्च्युनिटी लसेसको फिगर्सहरू युज भन्दा पनि हामीले चाहिँ के गरेको थियो भन्दाखेरि जुन प्रोजेक्ट डिजाइनको बेलामा लाइक अब सबै कुरा त अभियसली मलाई त्यति अफ द टप अफ माई हेड चाहिँ थाहा नभए पनि हामीले के देखेको थियौँ भन्दाखेरि उदाहरणको लागि अब मलाई याद भएको उदाहरण फ्रान्स जस्तो केसमा जब त्यहाँ इन्टरमिडिएसन र काउन्सिलिङ सुरु हुन्छ अनएम्प्लोइमेन्टबाट निस्किन मान्छेको चान्स चाहिँ 50% इन्क्रिज हुन्छ र सँगसँगै एक्चुअली एउटा पर्मानेन्ट भनौँ न जब नट यो टेम्पररी इम्प्लोइमेन्टको सेभिङ र पर्मानेन्ट जब पाउने एउटा स्टेबल जब पाउनेको प्रोबेबिलिटी पनि 34% इन्क्रिज हुने रहेछ कम्पेयर टु काउन्टर फ्याक्टरल। सो त्यस्तो खालको इक्जाम्पल्सहरू चाहिँ ग्लोबली हामीले हेऱ्यौँ। इन टर्म्स अफ एउटा स्ट्रङ इम्प्लोइमेन्ट सर्भिस भयो भने त्यसले कसरी मान्छेहरूलाई सहयोग गर्छ इन टर्म्स अफ लङ्गर टर्म इम्प्लोइमेन्ट लाइभलीहुड इम्प्रुभमेन्ट आउटकम्सहरूको त्यो चाहिँ हामीले हेरेको थियौँ। तर एक्चुअल
म्युट छ ज्यास्मिन जी, तपाईको म्युट छ।
सिस्टममै Okay, हजुर. So फाइनली मैले त्यो फ्रान्सको एक्जाम्पल भनिरहेको थिएँ, तर स्पेसिफिक नेपालको लागि अपर्च्युनिटी लस फिगर्स हामीले चाहिँ युज गरेको थिएन. थ्याङ्क यू.
म जाउँ त हाम्रो निर्मलजीको क्वेसनमा. रामजी हेलो.
रामजी लस्ट हुनुभयो कि? हुन्छ नि सर, हजुरले कन्टिन्युस गर्दै गरे भयो.
तपाईँ सकिहाल्नु नि त. फणीन्द्रजीको के क्वेसन थियो क्या तपाईँको, अथवा केही छ भने म जान्छु ल.
सर हजुर गरिहाल्नुहोस्, त्यस पछाडि आई विल जम्प इन, नो प्रब्लम. लेट्स गो अहेड. रामजी कता?
हाम्रो निर्मलजीले एकदमै राम्रो कुरा उठाउनु भयो. यो चाहिँ भल्नरेबल पिपुलहरूको लागि इम्प्लोइमेन्टको लागि के गर्न सकिन्छ भनेर. हामीले म सानो मेरो लर्निङ सेयर गर्न चाहन्छु. यो फर्स्ट लेभलको हाम्रो ब्रिज प्रोजेक्टले हलियाहरूको लागि स्किल इम्प्लोएबिलिटी इन्हान्समेन्ट प्रोग्राम एउटा हामीले रन गरेका थियौँ अघि. तर के हुँदो रहेछ भनेदेखि अब यो एकदम डिसएडभान्टेज ग्रुपको पिपुलहरूको लागि हामीले कुनै पनि स्किल ट्रेनिङ इम्प्लोएबिलिटी ट्रेनिङहरू जब हामीले गर्दैछौँ भनेदेखि यो चाहिँ अरूको जस्तो चाहिँ सिम्पल थोरै कस्टले हुँदो रहेनछ. यो चाहिँ अलिकति हामीले उनीहरूलाई चाहिँ ट्रेनिङ दिने, उनीहरूको निड के छ, मार्केटको निड के छ त्यो हेरेर त्यहाँबाट लोकल मार्केटसँग कसरी लिङ्क गर्न सकिन्छ, अनि त्यसपछि उनीहरूलाई पोस्ट ट्रेनिङ पनि कस्तो खालको सपोर्टहरू दिन सकिन्छ, यो सबै कुराहरू प्लान गरेर हामीले गऱ्यौँ. अलिकति पैसा पनि खर्च गऱ्यौँ भनेदेखि डेफिनेटली रिजल्ट ल्याउन सक्छ. नत्र भने चाहिँ उही सानोतिनो यसो ट्रेनिङ गरेर सक्ने अवस्थामा जान्छ है. अब यस्तो कार्यक्रमहरू हामीले अरू यो जाजरकोटमा पनि एक्सटेन्ड गर्ने विचार गरेका छौँ. तपाईँहरू चाहिँ त्यसमा केही कामहरू गर्न सक्नुहुन्छ, कोलाबोरेसन गर्नुहुन्छ अथवा इनपुट्स दिनुहुन्छ भनेदेखि पक्कै हामी यहाँहरूसँग सेयर गर्न सक्छौँ होला. र हाम्रो प्रोग्राममा के थियो भनेदेखि उनीहरूको चाहिँ निड एनालाइसिस गरेर, त्यसपछि मार्केटको निड एनालिसिस गरेर, त्यसपछि मार्केटमा कुन छ, त्यहाँको लोकल मार्केटमा निड के चिजको छ, बेनिफिसियरीको निड दुइटै म्याच हुने खालको अप्सनहरू ट्रेडहरूमा उनीहरूलाई ट्रेनिङ दिने, त्यसपछि सिटिबिटीको सर्टिफिकेसन गराएर त्यसपछि पोस्ट ट्रेनिङको सपोर्टहरू, कसैलाई इक्विपमेन्ट टुलहरू चाहिएला, कसैलाई चाहिँ सानो चाहिँ फन्ड चाहिएला प्रोग्राम के अरे बिजनेस स्टार्ट गर्नलाई, त्यस्तो खालको कार्यक्रमहरू हामीले गरेका छौँ. त्यो चाहिँ के भने अहिलेको हाम्रो चाहिँ प्रिलिमिनरी यो मिड लाइन सर्वेको रिजल्ट अनुसार सक्सेसफुल नै देखिएको थियो. तर अब अहिले कोभिडले गर्दा अलिकति छिन्न भिन्न भइरहेछ. फेरि हामीले चाहिँ अब यो केही समयपछि हामी स्टार्ट गर्छौँ होला. मैले उहाँको निर्मलजीको यो क्वेसन, त्यसपछि एग्रिकल्चरको कुरामा वास्तवमा हाम्रो राम बुढामगरजीले भन्नुभएको कुराहरू, कृषिको जुन बजारमा मार्केटमा नआउने भएर असर डेफिनेटली परिराखेको छ. हामीले सायद त्यहाँ छुटायौँ होला. कृषि भनेर ओभरअल भन्दा पनि त्यो कृषि उपजलाई मार्केटसम्म ल्याउने अवस्थामा अहिले ट्रान्सपोर्टेसन हल्ट भएको हुनाले, अनि त्यसपछि बिचको चाहिँ त्यसलाई ट्रान्सपोर्ट गर्ने सप्लाई चेनहरूलाई पनि काम गर्न अप्ठ्यारो भएको हुनाले डेफिनेटली कृषकहरूलाई यसले इम्प्याक्ट पारेकै छ. त्यो कुरा हामीले छुटाएको हो भने पनि यहाँले उठाउनु भयो, which is very much good. I appreciate it. अहिलेलाई मैले यति नै सकेँ. सुरेशजी.
थ्याङ्क यू नारायण सर. रामजी हुनुहुन्छ होइन त स्टिल?
छु सर.
ओके. सो मैले थोरै, मेरो धेरै छैन. वास्तवमा अघि जस्मिनजीले भनिहाल्नुभयो यो एग्रिकल्चरको कुरामा वास्तवमा हामी सबै नै एग्रिकल्चर ब्याकग्राउन्डका रहन्छौँ. यहाँ रामजीले निकालेकै चाहिँ प्रसङ्गबाट म अलिकति थोरै मेरो चाहिँ बुझाइराख्न चाहन्छु. डेफिनेटली एग्रिकल्चर सेक्टर कम हिट भयो भन्न खोजेको त होइन. त्यसकारण हामीले यसलाई अघि नै पनि मैले मेरो प्रेजेन्टेसनमा अलिकति टच गर्न प्रयास गरेको थिएँ. हामीले इक्विटी पर्सपेक्टिभबाट हेर्नुपर्छ, एसेसमेन्टहरूलाई पनि अलिकति कम्पेरिटिभ ढङ्गबाट हेर्नुपर्छ होला. एउटा कुरा चाहिँ के सत्य हो भने यो कोभिडले सबै सेक्टरलाई हिट गरेको छ, तर समान रूपमा हिट गरेको छैन. त्यसकारण अहिले हामीसँग डेटा नभएसम्म मैले पनि मेरो त्यो भावना छैन कि एग्रिकल्चर सेक्टर चाहिँ लेस हिट भयो म भन्न पनि सक्दिनँ. यदि कहीँ कतै चाहिँ प्रेजेन्टेसनमा त्यस्तो आएको रहेछ भने त्यसको लागि म क्षमा माग्न चाहन्छु. र यो सँगसँगै यहाँ डाक्टर निर्मल सरले चाहिँ उठाउनु भएको विषयसँग मलाई अलिकति जोड्न मन लाग्यो सायद त्यसले पनि अलिकति कन्फ्युजन क्रिएट गरेको हुनसक्छ एउटा कुरा चाहिँ मैले त्यहाँ के छुन्न खोजेको थिएँ भने जस्तो लेबर मिनिस्ट्रीले प्रपोज लेबर बैंकको कुरा गर्दै जाँदा त्यो लेबर बैंकमा चाहिँ तपाईँको अब रेजिस्ट्रेसन गराउने अनि जब प्लेसमेन्ट गराउने कुराहरू भइरहेको थियो त्यसमध्ये उहाँहरूको चाहिँ टार्गेट भनेको त्यहाँ कस्तो छ भने हुन त यो स्टिल पाइपलाइनमा छ मेरो बहस भएको क्रममा त्यो मैले अलिकति मेरो एक्सपिरियन्स रिफ्लेक्ट गर्दा त्यो त्यस्तो चाहिँ ट्विस्ट भयो कि भनेर मात्रै मैले क्लियर बनाउन खोजेको जस्तो माइग्रेन्ट इन्फ्लक्सलाई टार्गेट गरिएको छ अनि सेक्टर हेरिएको छ एग्रिकल्चर अब त्यहाँ हाम्रो त्यहाँ भनाइ के भने यति मात्रैले पुग्दैन किनभने अघि डाक्टर निर्मलले उठाउनु भयो माइग्रेन्ट इन्फ्लक्सको इस्युजलाई ल ठिक छ लार्जर इन्फर्मल सेक्टरको चाहिँ एउटा सब सेक्टर कृषि हो द्याट्स फाइन लार्जरमा नै धेरै तपाईँको माइग्रेन्ट इन्फ्लक्सलाई चाहिँ इङ्गेज गराउन चाहनु यो राम्रो कुरा हो तर ल्यान्डलेसको इस्यु बढी छ माइग्रेन्ट वर्कर ल्यान्डलेसमा अनि के गर्नुहुन्छ किनभने एग्रिकल्चर सेक्टर भनेको मोस्टली तपाईँको सेल्फ इम्प्लोइमेन्ट अनि तपाईँको होइन ठिक छ कमर्सियल जाने हो भने त एग्रो फार्महरू बनाउनलाई त इट्स अ बिग क्यापिटलको कुरो छ होइन त्यसले गर्दा इम्प्लोइमेन्ट जब क्रिएसन र जब प्लेसमेन्ट गर्ने क्रममा चाहिँ हामीले एग्रिकल्चर सँगसँगै अरू नन एग्रिकल्चर सेक्टरलाई पनि हामीले ध्यान दिनुपर्छ ताकि हामीले थोरै लगानी र सजिलै जब क्रिएट गर्न सक्छौँ अथवा तपाईँको रिइन्फोर्स गर्न सक्छौँ भन्ने हिसाबले पनि मैले अलिकति प्रसङ्ग जोडेको थिएँ सायद त्यसले अलिकति कन्फ्युजन क्रिएट गरेको भए क्षमा माग्न चाहे तपाईँको चाहिँ एकदमै जेन्युन थियो मैले सायद यता फणीन्द्र जीको चाहिँ मैले खासै एड्रेस गर्न पर्ने बाँकी देखिनँ किनभने हाम्रो यता जस्मिन जी र नारायण सरबाट आइसक्यो हस् धन्यवाद
हस् धन्यवाद सर हाम्रो किरण ओझा सरले च्याट बक्समा लेख्नु भएको थियो सर तपाईँ सोध्नुहुन्छ आफै
किरण ओझा सरको प्रश्न सायद मलाई नै होला मैले हेरेको थिएँ
बेसिकली
वेजको कुराको
हजुर त्यो मलाई चाहिँ एउटा जस्मिन जीसँग एकदम सिधा स्ट्रेट आन्सर भए पनि हुन्छ मलाई चाहिँ नि त्यो जस्तो लेभल अफ एजुकेसन र इन्फर्मालिटी अफ वर्कको चाहिँ नि कति रिलेसन छ कि छैन भनेर एउटा जान्न मन लागेको जस्तो यो कोभिड आफ्टर कोभिड पनि मैले एउटा के देखेँ भन्दाखेरि जो मान्छेहरू अलिकति लिटरेट छन् उनीहरूले चाहिँ नि कोभिड पछि कतिको जब लुज भयो उनीहरू सबै मान्छेलाई अप्ठ्यारो पर्यो भन्दा कतिपय मान्छेले पैसा कमाएको पनि देखेँ क्या मैले आफ्टर कोभिड चाहिँ नि भन्दाखेरि द्याट इमिडिएटली चाहिँ नि बिजनेस स्टार्ट गर्यो उनीहरूले विभिन्न किसिमको चाहिँ चिजहरू गर्यो उनीहरूले बेसरी पैसा कमायो त्यो पनि एउटा चाहिँ नि आफ्टर कोभिड त्यो पनि देखियो र त्यो चाहिँ लेभल अफ एजुकेसन र इन्फर्मालिटी अफ वर्क अथवा वर्कसँगको चाहिँ नि यो रिलेसन चाहिँ कस्तो छ भन्ने एउटा चिज चाहिँ नि त्यो मलाई चाहिँ नि अनि अर्को कुरा चाहिँ नि मैले नारायणजीलाई खास सोध्न खोजेको कुरा अलरेडी आन्सर गरिराख्नु भएको थियो यो टाइम वेस्ट नगरौँ म खालि सेट आन्सर गर्छु थ्याङ्क यू
हस् थ्याङ्क यू सो मच
quickly, very quickly. I think higher level of education, formal sector jobs, not definitely globally the evidence data ko hisabले so तपाईले भन्नु भएको त्यो clear छ in terms of level of education, work type भनौँ न formal informal चाहिँ global trends मा चाहिँ त्यो clear छ र त्यो सँगसँगै linked obviously चाहिँ and त्यसपछि income levels आउँछ
तपाईले जुन मैले सुरु गरेँ है त रामजी यो किरणजीले जो मिनिमम वेजको मैले कुरा गरेँ भन्नुभयो अब नेपालको ओभरअल डेभलपमेन्टमा इन्डियाको यस्तो क्रुसियल इन्फ्लुएन्स हुन्छ त्यसलाई हामीले नजरअन्दाज गर्न डेफिनेटली सकिँदैन हरेक सेक्टरमा हरेक चिजमा यसको इन्फ्लुएन्स हुन्छ त्यसैले यो मिनिमम वेजलाई चाहिँ हामीले रेगुलेट गर्ने कुरामा पनि यो पक्कै यसले अलिकति अप्ठ्यारो त होला तर त्यसो भनेर हामीले फेरि मिनिमम वेज हाम्रो देशको लहरूलाई चाहिँ हामीले फलो गरेनौँ त्यसलाई इम्प्लिमेन्ट गरेनौँ भनेदेखि त हामी सधैँभरि जब इन्डियाको चाहिँ त्यो पनि बिहार उत्तर प्रदेशको र वेस्ट बङ्गालको विकास अगाडि बढ्छ अनि मात्रै हामी अगाडि बढ्ने अवस्थामा रहिरहन्छौँ होला यद्यपि यो इस्यु चाहिँ अलिकति अप्ठ्यारै छ, उहाँबाट वर्करहरूको फ्लो यता हुने, अलिकति यहाँबाट वेज अलिकति बढाउँदाखेरि, तर अब त्यसो भनेर हामीले सधैँभरि हामीले चाहिँ मिनिमम वेजभन्दा बिलोमा वर्करलाई चाहिँ काममा लगाउनु पर्छ भन्ने पर्सपेक्टिभमा सायद जान मिल्दैन होला। सायद किरण सरले त्यही कुरो सोध्न खोज्नु भएको हो कि के हो, मैले भन्नुपर्ने कुरा यति नै।
हजुर, डेफिनेटली मलाई एउटा कुरा चाहिँ के भन्दाखेरि यसमा एउटा चाहिँ मैले यो रेज मात्रै गर्न खोजेको, जस्तो हाम्रो एग्रिकल्चर प्रडक्ट्सहरूमा चाहिँ प्रफिटेबिलिटीको हिसाबले हेऱ्यो भनेदेखि चाहिँ नि इन्डियाबाट इम्पोर्ट गर्दाखेरि कति पैसा पर्छ र हामीले यहाँ प्रडक्सन गर्दाखेरि कति पैसा पर्छ भन्यो भने थुप्रैवटा प्रडक्टमा चाहिँ इन्डियाबाट इम्पोर्ट गर्दा सस्तो पर्दो रहेछ। अब त्यो चाहिँ नि अब भन्दा प्राइसै उतापट्टि सस्तो पर्ने कि, अनि त्यसले गर्दा त्यो चाहिँ नि भन्दाखेरि यदि त्यो हाम्रो स्ट्यान्डर्ड वेज रेट राखेर हेऱ्यो भनेदेखि चाहिँ इन्डियाबाट इम्पोर्ट गर्दाखेरि सस्तो हुन्छ। अब यो चाहिँ के हुन्छ भने मान्छेलाई चाहिँ तिमीले नेपाली चिज खान्छौ तर नेपाली किसानलाई सहयोग हुन्छ भनेर एजुकेट गर्ने चाहिँ अर्को पाटो भयो। तर नर्मली काउली किन्न जाँदा त मान्छेले 20 रुपियाँ किलोको काउली मा पहिले हात लाउँछ, 30 रुपियाँ किलोको काउली भन्दा त अब त्यो त रोक्न सकिँदैन होइन। अब यो चिज चाहिँ नि यो बडा कम्प्लिकेटेड चिज चाहिँ नि देखिरहेको छौँ अहिले हामी। बेसिकली एग्रिकल्चरमै मैले पनि जिन्दगी बिताउन चाहिँ, तर अहिले यो कम्प्लेक्सिटिजहरू चाहिँ नि एकदमै अभियस चाहिँ नि बाहिर देखिरहेको छ। अब यो चिजहरूलाई चाहिँ नि भन्दा यो इस्युजहरूलाई यो कसरी एड्रेस गर्ने भन्ने पोलिसीको आजको डायलग भएकोले गर्दाखेरि जस्तो भनौँ न एन्टी डम्पिङको कुरालाई लिएर आउने हो कि अथवा अरू चिजहरू कुनै पोलिसी इस्युजहरू चाहिँ नि कुनै पोलिसी मेजर्सहरू हुन्छ जसले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ यो चिजलाई चाहिँ रेगुलेट गर्न सकिन्छ कि भन्ने हिसाबले त्यो आशयले उठाएको हो यो चिज।
क्विकली छोटो कुरा मात्रै म भन्छु, एकदमै कुरो तपाईँले जायज कुरा उठाउनु भयो। वास्तवमा यो सबै चिजमा लागु हुन्छ, जस्तो इन्डिया र चाइनाबाट इम्पोर्ट हुने आउने सामानहरू सस्तो प्रोडक्टहरू चाहिँ नेपालको यहाँको चाहिँ मार्केटले यहाँको नेपालको प्रोड्युसरहरूले कम्पिट गर्न सक्दैन भन्ने कुरा डेफिनेटली एकदम ट्रु नै हो। अब यसको पोलिसी अप्सन भनेको त के हो भने गभर्मेन्टले हाम्रो यहाँको एन्टरप्रेन्योरहरूलाई, हाम्रो यहाँको चाहिँ एग्रो फार्मरहरूलाई या त सब्सिडी दिनु पर्यो या त उताबाट आउने कुरालाई केही इम्पोर्ट ड्युटीहरू लगाएर रेगुलेट गर्नु पर्यो। त्यो गभर्मेन्टले नगरुन्जेलसम्म सम्भव हुँदैन मैले देखेको।
हस्, थ्याङ्क यू। लगभग च्याट बक्समा भएको क्वेसन्सहरू चाहिँ सक्यो। अब यता हाम्रो कसैको क्वेसन्स छ भने हामी स्टिल केही क्वेसन्सहरू लिन सक्छौँ होला। अब छैन भने चाहिँ लगभग हामी प्रोग्रामको अन्तिमतिर आइपुगेका छौँ। कसैको केही छ भने प्लिज। पूर्ण सर। हेलो।
हाम्रो थ्याङ्क यू सो मच है रामजी। मैले अलिकति सोसल पोलिसी एन्ड सोसल जस्टिस ल्याब, हामीले अलिकति ट्रान्सडिसिप्लिनरी सोसल जस्टिस ल्याब भनेर भनिराखेका चाहिँ छौँ होइन। यसमा कस्तो भन्दाखेरि अब डिफ्रेन्ट स्टेक होल्डर्सहरू चाहिँ दे आर कमिङ टुगेदर होइन टु इन्ट्र्याक्ट। यस्तै भाइब्रेन्ट डिस्कसन्सहरू अघि गोविन्द सरले भन्नुभएको चाहिँ पोलिसी मेकर्सहरू अलिकति डाइभर्स रेन्जको स्टेक होल्डर्सलाई लिएर आएर कुराकानी गरेर चाहिँ डिफ्रेन्ट पोलिसिजहरूमा चाहिँ अलिकति अब ह्युमन सेन्ट्रिक डिजाइन थिङ्किङ एन्ड इनोभेसनको सर्टेन प्रिन्सिपल्सहरू सर्टेन स्टेजेसहरूमा चाहिँ पार गरेर त्यो हाम्रो प्रोसेस फलो गरेर चाहिँ कुनै पोलिसी डिबेट डायलगहरू चाहिँ अलिकति इन्टेन्सिभ हिसाबले चाहिँ ल्याब एप्रोचबाट चाहिँ हामी कुरा गर्न खोजिरहेछौँ कि अब यहाँहरू पनि अब त्यो इस्युमा काम गर्दै हुनुहुन्छ होइन। सोसल पोलिसी, सोसल जस्टिस, सोसल प्रोटेक्सन्स होइन, यसमा कसरी जान चाहिँ सकिन्छ अनि हाउ क्यान वी कोलाबोरेट होइन टुगेदर्स होइन। अनि एकाडेमिया प्लस चाहिँ तपाईँको चाहिँ डिफ्रेन्ट डेभलपमेन्ट पार्टनर्सहरू होइन, यहाँहरूले कसरी सजेस्ट गर्नुहुन्छ होला होइन। अब स्पिकर्सहरूलाई त क्वेसन भइ नै हाल्यो यो होइन, प्लस अरू पनि साथीहरू अब एकदम भाइब्रेन्ट विद्यानाथ कोइरालादेखि लिएर हाम्रो अब किरण सरहरू पनि हुनुहुन्छ होइन, अब गोविन्द सरहरू हुन्छ होइन। उहाँहरूले अहिले फ्रीली उहाँहरूको इनपुटहरू यसरी जाँदा ठिक हुन्छ, यो दिस इज द राइट वे अफ कोलाबोरेसन भन्ने पनि सजेस्ट गर्नुहुन्छ भने त विल बी ह्याप्पी टु टेक द्याट सर्ट अफ सजेसन टु इनपुट होइन। अझ नारायण सरको त सोसल पोलिसी नै स्पेसलाइजेसन भएको हुँदाखेरि चाहिँ उहाँबाट अलिक बढी इनपुट हामी खोजिराखेका चाहिँ छौँ होइन। त्यो हिसाब अलिकति ओपन गरे यो फ्लोर हैन फिल सबैले आफ्नो हिसाबले फ्रीली आफ्नो कुराहरू राखिदिनु भयो भने चाहिँ विल बी ह्याप्पी टु टेक हैन दोज काइन्ड अफ इनपुट एन्ड नोट हैन हामीलाई एकदमै राम्रो हुन्थ्यो भन्ने यो पनि वान अफ द अब्जेक्टिभ अफ दिस डिस्कसन भनिन्छ थ्यांक यू सो मच रामजी
थ्यांक यू सर हामीसँग विद्यानाथ कोइराला सर हुन्छ सरले केही सोध्न खोज्नु भएको छ सर ओभर टु यु
धन्यवाद नमस्कार मैले सुनिरहेँ साथीहरूले के भन्नुभयो भनेर गुमनाम भएर त्यो कुरा आएन कि भनेर डराएर अनि त्यस मात्रै थोरै कुरा भन्न खोजेँ एउटा म चाहिँ यदि साँच्चै गरिब केटाकेटीहरूलाई वा गरिब युवाहरूलाई वा गरिब प्रौढहरूलाई न्याय गर्ने हो भने हामीसँग दुई चारवटा कुराहरू साह्रै सजिलोरी गर्न सकिने ठाउँ देख्छु पहिलो कुरो चाहिँ नि इम्प्लोइमेन्टको अवसर कहाँ छ भने पालिकामा छ भन्ने किसिमको कुरो पनि गर्नु पर्यो एउटा त्यो आधार हो त्यसो भन्ने बित्तिकै इम्प्लोइमेन्टको आधार पालिकामा हो भने पालिकालाई चाहिँ के भन्नु पर्यो भने लो यो मान्छेहरू यसरी छन् भनेर भने मलाई लाग्छ एउटा काम त्यो हो दोस्रो चाहिँ नि उहाँहरूसँग युवासँग वा वृद्धसँग वा चाहिँ बच्चाहरूसँग जे स्किल छ स्किल के रहेछ उनीहरूसँग भनेर स्किलको लेखाजोखा चाहिँ राख्नुपर्ने हो परम्परागत स्किल के होला आधुनिक स्किल के होला त्यो स्किलको लेखाजोखा हामीसँग जरुरी हो त्यो स्किल भइसकेपछि त्यो स्किललाई अपडेट गर्ने किसिमको डिजाइन हामीसँग के हुने हो किनभने त्यो स्किल त पुरानो भइरहन्छ त्यसले नयाँ नयाँ स्किलहरूलाई अपडेट गर्ने हाम्रो डिजाइन के हो पालिकासँगको हाम्रो सहकार्य के हो भन्ने किसिमको तेस्रो बुँदा चाहिँ मैले राखेँ चौथो चाहिँ मैले कसरी देखेँ भनेर भन्दाखेरि अब हामी जमिनको कुरा गर्दा रहेछौँ दलितहरूसँग जमिनको एकदमै कम छ जब पहाडमा त बरु जिनतिन अलिअलि देखिन्छ मधेसमा त झन् बिजोग छ किनभने मधेसमा चाहिँ पुस्तौँ पुस्ता बसेका छन् तर जमिन बस्ने घर पनि अर्काको उसमा अथवा चाहिँ नि यो सार्वजनिक जमिनमा छ त्यसो भएदेखि हामीसँग चाहिँ जमिन पालिकाले लिजमा लाउने किसिमको ढङ्गरङ्ग सोच्न सक्छौँ किनभने पालिकाले वन क्षेत्रलाई लिजमा लाउन सक्ला वा चाहिँ सार्वजनिक चौरहरूलाई लिजमा लाउन सक्ला अथवा चाहिँ कसैको व्यक्तिको घर छोडेको घर जमिनहरूलाई चाहिँ लिजमा लाउन सक्ला त्यस्ता अभ्यासहरू ठाउँ ठाउँ भएको देख्छु त्यो तरिकाबाट उनीहरूलाई चाहिँ जमिनमा पुर्याउन सक्ने किसिमको सम्भावना छ अर्को चाहिँ के रहेछ भन्दा यो जमिन नभए पनि खेती गर्न सकिने सम्भावना पर्याप्त मात्रामा अब आइसकेका छन् प्रविधिहरू अब यहाँहरू परिचित हुनुहुन्छ जस्तो यो के भन्छ भित्ता खेती भनेर भन्नाले चाहिँ भित्तैमा घरको भित्तामा बोतल यो प्लास्टिकका बोतलहरू राखेर वा चाहिँ सामानहरू राखेर चाहिँ खेती गर्न सक्ने अथवा आफ्नै चोकमा आँगनमा खेती गर्न सक्ने त्यस्तो किसिमका चिन्तनहरू पर्याप्त मात्रामा रहेछन् अहिले त्यसो भएपछि त्यो चिन्तनमा उहाँलाई अपडेट गर्न सकियो भने त्यसले काम गर्दछ चाहे त्यो हलियाको कुराकानी होस् चाहे कमैयाको कुरा होस् चाहे चाहिँ नि अरू खालका मान्छेहरू हो त्यस्तो किसिमको हिसाबले अर्को बाटो चाहिँ नि मैले देखेँ अर्को चाहिँ नि उनीहरूलाई लगानीको जरुरी हुँदो रहेछ त्यो लगानी कतै न कतै सजिलै ढङ्गले पाउने किसिमको कुरो हुँदो रहेछ अब जस्तो उसको लगानी ब्याङ्कको लगानी भन्यो भनेदेखि लम्बेतान हुँदो रहेछ सहकारीको लगानी भन्यो भने अलि सजिलो हुँदो रहेछ माइजन मधेसको भाषामा भन्यो भने त्यो के महाजनको लगानी भनेर भने बडो सजिलो हुँदो रहेछ त्यसैले महाजनको लगानी अब यहाँ हजुरहरू कति परिचित हुनुहुन्छ थाहा छैन महाजनको लगानी भनेर भने चाहिँ चाहिएको बेलामा खुजुक दिन्छ पछि गएर आएर ठग्छ अब त्यो ठग्ने त एउटा कुराकानी होला तर उनको स्टाइलबाट हामीले लगानी गर्ने तरिकाहरू जान्न सक्यौँ भने त्यसले के हुन्छ भने लगानी गर्नको निम्ति उसले समय खर्च गर्नु पनि परेन घर घरमा सपोर्ट गर्ने किसिमको डिजाइन हुन सक्छ त्यो तरिकाले चाहिँ लगानीको ग्यारेन्टी जरुरी हुँदो रहेछ त्यसपछि गएर चाहिँ उसको निम्ति अब मार्केटमा गर्ने हो कि प्रमोसनल हो प्रमोसनल हो कि प्रोडक्टिभ हो दुईटा कुराकानी एकदमै क्लियर छुट्याउनु पर्दो रहेछ किनभने हाम्रो चिन्तन जहिले पनि मार्केट भएछ म केही दिन अगाडि केही महिना मलाई चाहिँ 1 महिना 1.5 महिना अगाडि कृषि मन्त्रीसँग पनि कुराकानी गरेका थिएँ उहाँलाई भने 1 महिना खान पाउने मान्छेलाई 3 महिना खाने के गरी बनाउनुहुन्छ 3 महिना खानेलाई 6 महिना के गरी बनाउनुहुन्छ 6 महिना खानेलाई 1 वर्ष कसरी बनाउनुहुन्छ 1 वर्ष खाने मान्छेको बचत मार्केटमा पुर्याउने तरिका के हुन्छ यसरी सोच्यो भन्दै काम होला मन्त्रीज्यू नत्र भए तपाईको विशाल खेती र के जाति भनेर त चाइनाको भाषाले यहाँ काम गर्दैन है भनेर भने मैले सिधै त्यसो भए हुनाले मैले चाहिँ के किसिमको हिसाबले भन्न खोजेँ भने यदि त्यस्तो हो भने हाम्रो मान्छेहरूलाई कति दिनलाई कसरी खान पर्ने किसिमको कुरोहरू चाहिँ गर्न सकिन्छ भनेर भन्ने चाहिँ एउटा कुरो जरुरी रहेछ भनेर भन्ने मैले देखेँ अर्को चाहिँ नि पेसासँग जोड दिनुपर्ने शिक्षा अर्को पाटो हुँदो रहेछ, किनभने पेसाले शिक्षा माग्दो रहेछ, शिक्षाले पेसा माग्दो रहेछ, यो दुईटाको बिचको अनन्य सम्बन्ध रहेछ। त्यसो हुँदाखेरि त्यो पेसा र शिक्षा जोड दिने किसिमको कुराकानी गर्नुपर्ने रहेछ। फाइनल्ली मैले के देखेँ भनेर भन्दाखेरि नि उहाँहरूलाई पालिकामा मात्रै राख्ने त होइन, प्रदेशमा के सम्भावना छ, त्यो के अरे देशभरि के सम्भावना छ, वा विदेशमा के सम्भावना छ, यो सम्भावनाको कुरोहरू पनि उहाँहरूलाई भनिदिनुपर्ने रहेछ। तपाईँकै परम्परागत स्किलबाट सम्भावना के हो, तपाईँले जानेका आधुनिक सिपबाट सम्भावना के हो, नयाँ सिप पठायो भनेदेखि तपाईँ त्यहाँबाट सम्भावना के हो, बजारको यस्तो यस्तो किसिमको आवश्यकता छ, यसमा तपाईँ कसरी जोडिने हो, यो किसिमको हिसाबले हामीले लान सक्यौँ भने हामी के गर्छौँ भने तल जनता जनार्दनको भुइँलाई छोएर वा ज्वरोलाई समातेर त्यहाँबाट माथि उठ्छौँ। होइन भने हाम्रा कुराहरू चाहिँ दर्के पानी परे जस्तो हुँदो रहेछ, माथिबाट कुरा गर्दा रहेछौँ, तल दलित कहाँ पुग्ने अथवा चाहिँ हलिया कहाँ पुग्ने अथवा चाहिँ जनजाति कहाँ पुग्ने वा चाहिँ विपन्न परिवारमा पुग्ने वा अपाङ्गता कहाँ पुग्ने भनेर भन्ने कुरै नहुँदो रहेछ। त्यसैले म चाहिँ नि यसरी सोचौँ कि भनेर भन्ने मैले आफ्नो चिन्तन राखेँ। धन्यवाद, अवसर दिनुभएकोमा आभार व्यक्त गर्छु।
धन्यवाद सर। पूर्ण सरको र हाम्रो विद्यानाथ सरको उसमा केही रेस्पोन्स गर्न पर्ने छ भने म स्पिकर्स सुनिल सर, सुनिल म्याम र नानी सरलाई ह्यान्डओभर गर्छु।
मबाट सुरु गर्दा मैले रेस्पोन्स गर्न पर्ने ठाउँ देखिनँ। डाक्टर साहबको असाध्यै नै यो थटफुल जुन टिप्सहरू भने जस्तो हामी सबैको लागि किसिमको टिप्स दिनुभएको छ। अब उहाँ त ज्ञानको खानी नै हो, त्यसलाई हामीले सबैले मनन गरौँ। मबाट केही त्यसमा रेस्पोन्स गर्न पर्ने छैन। हस्, धन्यवाद।
हजुर, म दुईटा सानो मात्रै कुरा राख्छु होला। सुरेशजीले भन्नुभएको जस्तो अब विद्यानाथ डाक्टर साहबले भन्नुभएको सानो पार्ट हामीले यति प्रोजेक्टमा प्रयास गर्न चाहिँ खोज्छौँ। अब कतिको अगाडि जान सक्छ चाहिँ अब हेर्न नि बाँकी छ। अनि म पूर्णजीले भन्नुभएको प्रश्नमा मलाई यही कार्यक्रममा पनि धेरैजनासँग कुरा गर्न पाएको अवसरले मलाई आफूलाई नि सोच्नलाई पनि सहयोग गर्यो। त्यो हिसाबले म दुईटा एउटा राख्छु। एउटा चाहिँ आई थिङ्क यो कुसुम एज एन एकाडेमिक पार्ट अफ द वर्ल्डले जुन भोलिको फ्युचर पोलिसी मेकर्सलाई यो अपर्च्युनिटीहरू दिइरहेछ, यो रियालिटीहरू ग्राउन्ड रियालिटीहरू के छ थाहा पाउनलाई र सँगसँगै यस्तो नेटवर्क बढाउँदै भोलि गएर अब इन्टर्नसिप होस्, अप्रेन्टिससिप होस्, कामै होस्, एउटा नेटवर्किङ चाहिँ यो यही प्लेटफर्मले पनि गर्न सक्छ होला। अनि अर्को चाहिँ अब तपाईँहरूले बोलाउनु भएको मान्छेमध्ये धेरैजनाले प्रश्न सोच्दाखेरि ग्राउन्ड रियालिटीलाई हेरेर प्रश्न सोच्दाखेरि हामीलाई एज मैले सुरुमा पनि भने वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्कको एम्प्लोइ हुँदाखेरि म धेरै जस्तो टेबल डेस्कमै बस्ने मान्छे पर्यौँ र झन् अहिले कोभिडमा त्यही भएको छ। त त्यो हिसाबले ग्राउन्ड रियालिटीको सुन्न र त्यसको बारे पनि हामीलाई एक हिसाबले हामीलाई सक दिन पनि एउटा राम्रो काम यस्तो खालको प्लेटफर्मले गर्न सक्छ। सो त्यो हिसाबले कोलाबोरेसन चाहिँ त्यस्तो विभिन्न किसिमले हुँदाखेरि यो दुईटा उदाहरण मात्रै मैले देखेँ। धन्यवाद।
थ्याङ्क यू म्याम। नारायण सर।
मेरो खासै केही छैन। अब कोइराला सरलाई धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद दिन्छु। उहाँले एकदम ग्राउन्ड रियालिटी दिनुभयो उहाँको लामो अनुभवको आधारमा। र खास गरेर सरले भन्नुभएकै लाइनमा हामीले यो प्रोजेक्ट सञ्चालन गर्दैछौँ। हाम्रो ब्रिज प्रोजेक्ट भन्ने छ आइएलओको। पछि पनि यसमा सरहरूसँग यहाँहरूसँग फेरि पनि डिस्कसन गरौँला। त्यसमा डिटेलमा हामीले अहिले कुरा गर्न सकिएन। तर एउटा कुरो के हो भनेदेखि यो दलित विपन्न परिवारको डिसएडभान्टेज ग्रुपहरूको लागि काम गर्दाखेरि हामीले चाहिँ के भने अरूको जस्तो सिम्पली सोचेर चाहिँ हुने रहेछ, अलिकति भिन्न किसिमले सोच्नु पर्ने रहेछ। चाहे त्यो ट्रेडिसनल स्किललाई युज गर्ने सन्दर्भमा होस् अथवा उनीहरूलाई चाहिँ उनीहरूको चाहिँ यो थिङ्किङमा चेन्ज ल्याउनको लागि पनि र अलिकति लङ टर्मसम्म हामीले इन्भेस्ट नगरिकन चाहिँ चेन्ज ल्याउन अलिकति गाह्रै पर्ने रहेछ भन्ने मैले चाहिँ अनुभव गरेको छु। पछि पनि सेयर गर्दै गरौँला यो कुराहरू। आजलाई यहाँहरू सबैले यो अप्सन दिनुभयो। यो यस्तो खालको पोलिसी सोसियल पोलिसीको इस्युहरूमा पहिलोचोटि म यो कार्यक्रममा इन्भल्भ हुँदैछु। किनभने हामी चाहिँ यो कस्तो भइएछ भने पुरै टेक्निकल्ली यो चाहिँ अफिसमा अफिसियल काम गर्ने अघि ज्यास्मिनजीले भन्नुभयो जस्तै अफिसकै काममा मात्रै इन्भल्भ भइरहने भएको हुनाले पहिलोचोटि यो अप्सन दिनुभयो। फेरि पनि अप्सन पाइयो भनेदेखि हामी म चाहिँ मेरो विचारहरूलाई राख्नेछु। यति भन्दै म बिदा हुन्छु। हस्, धन्यवाद।
धन्यवाद सर। डेफिनेटली हामीसँग अरू पनि एपिसोड्सहरू त्यसको कन्टिन्यू हुन्छ। डेफिनेटली हामी यसलाई कन्टिन्यू दिन्छौँ नै। अब म क्लोजिङ सेसनको लागि हाम्रो अविनाशजीलाई म ह्यान्डओभर गर्छु। अविनाशजी, ओभर टु यू।
थ्याङ्क यू रामजी। सो फर्स्ट अफ अल आज हाम्रो जो स्पिकर्सहरू आउनुभयो, हाम्रो सुरेश सर, नारायण सर र हाम्रो ज्यास्मिन म्यामलाई सबैभन्दा पहिले धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद। यस्तो व्यस्तताका बावजुद पनि हजुरहरूले आएर समय दिनुभयो र हामीले 2 घन्टा तोकेको थियौँ यो कार्यक्रमको लागि। अलमोस्ट हाम्रो 45 मिनट बढी जाँदाखेरि पनि हामीसँग अझै पनि पार्टिसिपेन्टहरू कनेक्टेड हुनुहुन्छ। त्यही भएर त्यसले पनि हाम्रो प्रोग्राम कस्तो आज राम्रो भइरहेको थियो भन्ने एउटा देखाउँछ। कतिको हाम्रो पार्टिसिपेन्टहरू पनि कतिको इन्थुजियास्टिक हुनुहुन्छ भनेर देखाउँछ। र पार्टिसिपेन्टहरूलाई पनि हामीसँग जोडिन आउनुभएकोमा चाहिँ म धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु। र भोलिको दिनमा अब यो चाहिँ हाम्रो सुरुवात हो। यस्तो डिस्कोर्स चाहिँ हामीले अझै फर्दर चाहिँ यसलाई हामी लान चाहिँ हामी अझै पनि प्रयास गरिरहनेछौँ काठमाडौँ युनिभर्सिटी हाम्रो एमपिपिएम स्कलर्स नेटवर्कबाट। र यति भन्दै क्लोजिङ रिमार्क्सको लागि चाहिँ हाम्रो आइएम स्वेडिश डेभलपमेन्ट पार्टनरको प्रोग्राम म्यानेजर सर केशव दाहाल सर हुनुहुन्छ। केशव दाहाल सरलाई चाहिँ प्रोग्राम क्लोज गरिदिनु हुन चाहिँ म आग्रह गर्न चाहन्छु। केशव सर।
हुन्छ, यहाँहरू सबैलाई नमस्कार। आज यो कुसुमले चाहिँ धेरै राम्रो विषयमा इन्फर्मल सेक्टर र भलनरेबल कम्युनिटीलाई कोभिडलाई पारेको असर र अब के गर्नुपर्छ, अब कस्ता सोसियल पोलिसीहरू बनाएर जानुपर्छ भन्ने विषयमा राम्रो छलफल भएको छ। हामीले चाहिँ कोभिडको सुरुवातदेखि नै भलनरेबल कम्युनिटीहरूले चाहिँ धेरै नै दुःख पाएको, रोजगारी गुमेको, अब खानमै समस्या परेको, यात्रा गर्दाका कठिनाइहरू, यो सबै चाहिँ सोसियल प्रोटेक्सनमा उहाँहरूको एक्सेस चाहिँ कम भएकोले गर्दा हो। र यसलाई कसरी अब यो इन्फर्मल सेक्टरको जबलाई फर्मल सेक्टरमा ट्रान्जिसन गर्ने भन्ने कुराहरू चाहिँ लान आवश्यक छ भन्ने विषयमा चाहिँ धेरै कन्टेक्स्टहरू, जस्तो 94% चाहिँ इन्फर्मल सेक्टरको जबले सेयर गर्छ भनेर चाहिँ यहाँहरूले हाइलाइट गर्नुभयो। त्यसकारण हामी सबैलाई एउटा सोच्न बाध्य बनाएको छ कि अब हामी सबै भएर कसरी चाहिँ यसमा लाग्ने। अब यसलाई चाहिँ एकदमै राम्रो फ्रुटफुल बनाउन सहयोग गर्नुभएकोमा हाम्रो सुरेश सर, नारायण सर, जस्मिन म्याडम सबैलाई धन्यवाद। र यहाँ एकदमै रिनाउन्ड सिभिल सोसाइटी एक्टरहरू पनि हुनुहुन्छ, यहाँ पार्टिसिपेट गरिरहनु भएको छ। अघि हामी 50 जना जति थियौँ होला, अहिले त अब घटेर 18 जना भइसक्यौँ। तर एकदमै राम्रो छ। र अब हामीले यो जसलाई सुनाउन खोजेको हो, सरकारले यस्तो पोलिसी बनाओस्, यस्तो बनाइदिए हुन्छ भनेर हामी छलफल गरिरहेका छौँ। तर अब सरकारको चाहिँ त्यति हुनुहुन्न होला यहाँ जस्तो लाग्छ पोलिसी मेकिङ लेभलबाट। त्यसकारण अब हामी पनि यो डायलग सिरिजमा हामी पनि सहयोग गर्दैछौँ कुसुमलाई। त्यसकारण अब कुसुम हामी मिलेर कसरी चाहिँ अब सरकार र पोलिसी मेकिङतिरबाट पनि पार्टिसिपेट गराउने र अझ यसलाई अझ फ्रुटफुल कसरी बनाउने भनेर चाहिँ हामीले सोच्नुपर्छ होला। पूर्णजी लगायत सबै टिमलाई म त्यो रिक्वेस्ट गर्न पनि चाहन्छु। र यहाँहरूको एकदमै भ्यालुएबल उपस्थिति, पार्टिसिपेसन, प्रेजेन्टेसन, डिस्कसन को लागि चाहिँ धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु। हवस् त, यहाँहरू सबैलाई धन्यवाद। र यो डायलग सेसन चाहिँ यहीँ अन्त्य भएको पनि जानकारी गराउन चाहन्छु।
रामजी, अब सिधै होइन, सबै सर म्यामहरूलाई धन्यवाद, नमस्कार।